Live from the divided states of America, it is now time for another 3 hours of the most disruptive show in those states. In the Independent Corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan. And together we are Fault Line with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get into the news. First of all, the Commission on Presidential Debates says it's revising its rules for the debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump this Thursday in Tennessee. It will be changing its rules so that they have 2 minutes of uninterrupted time at the beginning of each 15-minute response segment. And during that time, each candidate will only have his mic on for the time he's allotted to speak. Trump's re-election campaign released a statement last night agreeing to that change while accusing the commission of bias. Just briefly, Jamarl, I almost wish they would keep their mics muted for the whole damn debate just because that first one was so exhausting to watch. What's your opinion?
So I found this change interesting. Donald Trump needs to debate. Clearly, he needs to debate at this point. At least I think he does. I mean, it may be closer. But that's going to hurt him. I mean, because his strength is talking over. And if you think of, they didn't have this in the primaries. They didn't have this anywhere else. They've added this. I mean, I think this hurts him more than it hurts Biden. But I guess the catch is, does this maybe help him in a weird way by just having Biden to talk? So
yeah, that's the thing, is that during the first debate, he kind of almost wanted Trump to let Biden talk, not just out of a sense of common decency and tact, but because if he lets Biden talk, the feeling there is that Biden will start to ramble and appear discombobulated, as he seems to be on a deeper level. The other side of this is moving into the next headline, is if they each get their own allotted time, then Trump can kind of, the moderator's going to moderate, but he can kind of just talk, and he'll probably talk about the Hunter Biden laptop thing, which we were talking about a media blackout yesterday over that. This might be the sort of hole in that veil. This might be the thin edge of the wedge that starts to break that story into the wider media. Specifically, I'm going to move into the next headline here. During a campaign rally in Prescott, Arizona, Donald Trump slammed Joe Biden in the upcoming November presidential elections as corrupt. He reproached his son, Hunter Biden, as having, quote, the laptop from hell, end quote. We actually have a clip on this one. Andre, let's play that first clip.
Joe Biden is always and has been a corrupt politician. And as far as I'm concerned, the Biden family is a criminal enterprise. If you read this laptop, I tell you what, this is called the laptop from hell. The only laptop that was almost as good, maybe worse, was the laptop of Anthony Weiner. Do you remember that? Ding, 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 ding.
And there we go. And you know what? This is also coming as the director of national intelligence, John Ratcliffe, said that, quote, the intelligence community doesn't believe, end quote, that this laptop that's released is part of a concerted Russian election interference campaign. As Adam Schiff, Representative Adam Schiff, on Friday said, he's holding there. We have another clip here. I'm actually going to play this again. Adam Schiff on Friday, in relation to the New York Post stories, said that this was part of a Russian election interference campaign. It's just the irony, the memories, the deja vu. It's all coming back to me in a flash. Anyway, again, DNI John Ratcliffe said that's not the case. The intelligence community doesn't believe this. This came during a Fox News interview. Andre, let's play that second clip.
Tell us what's real and what's fake. Is this Russian disinformation, Director?
So, Maria, it's funny that some of the people that complain the most about intelligence being politicized are the ones politicizing intelligence. And unfortunately, in this case, it is Adam Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who, as you pointed out on Friday, said that the intelligence community believes that Hunter Biden's laptop and the emails on it are part of some Russian disinformation campaign. Let me be clear. The intelligence community doesn't believe that because there's no intelligence that supports that. And we have shared no intelligence with Chairman Schiff or any other member of Congress that Hunter Biden's laptop is part of some Russian disinformation campaign. It's simply not true. And this is exactly what I said I would stop when I became the director of national intelligence, and that's people using the intelligence community to leverage some political narrative. And in this case, apparently Chairman Schiff wants anything against his preferred political candidate to be deemed as not real, and is using the intelligence community, or attempting to use the intelligence community, to say there's nothing to see here. Don't drag the intelligence community into this. Hunter Biden's laptop is not part of some Russian disinformation campaign, and I think it's clear that the American people know that.
Now, what I would hope is that Ratcliffe, as the director of national intelligence, that his word trumps Schiff's in some sense, that he has more authority. I mean, Schiff is on the House Intelligence Committee. He's the head of that. So, he has something in it too. But I also can't help but feel Schiff is the guy who's been beating the Russiagate horse for year after year after year now. And after that was pretty thoroughly debunked over the last couple of years, maybe not in the wider mainstream media, but certainly for those who've been following it closely. And after specifically the impeachment fiasco failed, I can't help but feel like people are going to have some doubts when they hear him. But Jamarl, what's your take?
Unfortunately, we have a situation where if you say something 1 billion times, whether it's true or not, the fact that you said it 1 billion times starts to sink in. And so even though the public may not necessarily give it that much thought or that much credibility in regards to how much it digs in deep, they still may believe it. And so you get this kind of Democrats believe it, independents of varying degrees, and Republicans may, agree or disagree. But ultimately, it does sink in to some degree when you have an entire media system, an entire political party that basically has screamed Russia for everything that goes on. It sinks in. I mean, I don't necessarily know how deep it bites, but it does sink in.
It does. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a broad veneer, but it's not that deep. And again, if people start to look into this stuff, they'll find that there's a lot more to the story. In fact, that there's a lot of the story they've heard that's just false, not just incomplete, but completely false accusations, from intelligence agencies, from the former DNI back in early 2017. Just false. Anyway, we're talking about credibility here. I'm going to move into the next headline. President Trump reportedly slammed White House coronavirus task force leader Anthony Fauci in a campaign call, calling him a quote-unquote disaster. This, by the way, comes after Fauci said he predicted Trump would get COVID while watching a public appearance in which Trump was surrounded by people, few of whom were wearing masks. So just in terms of credibility, none of this is good for them, in my opinion. This is a long-standing wobbling from Trump, and then I don't know exactly how to put this, but Jamarl, you and I have had back and forth on this. I don't particularly trust Fauci either, with the sort of white lie early on. That in my assessment, cost
with that
medical establishment a lot of credibility here.
I know, but that
with masks,
I always think you're not being fair to Fauci on that. Look, because
he lied.
Yes.
It was a white lie, but he lied, man. It was like this huge white lie.
I know, Shane, but
that's
if you
not a
read
white
his
lie
statement,
in that case.
You can tell he's lying in his statement. I mean, is it a lie if he's telling you he's
good.
lying? Like if I'm telling you something and I don't want to tell you what I'm telling you, and I reveal the fact that I'm telling you something that's not entirely true, or basically I'm giving you the basis for it. I mean, I guess, look.
I hear you.
If you were in a situation where you have a job.
Straight up, that's gaslighting from the government.
Yes, it's gaslighting. But why is he gaslighting is more important.
Well, I don't know. Why does an abusive spouse gaslight?
No. This is different. That's a straw man. I mean, Fauci is in a situation where his government failed to provide the necessary materials. And Fauci, who believes, and who the CDC, the World Health Organization, all of them came to the same conclusion of pushing the same narrative of basically saying deprioritizing mask use for the public and emphasizing it for the people who are involved in emergency medicine.
All of them were wrong to do so. They should not have handled it that way. That was a permanent stain on their credibility, and we're still living in that.
I disagree.
If you look around the globe, how many lives were saved by that? We can't disentangle this stuff, but I would argue that more lives were lost because people were confused about the role of masks. They didn't know if they were effective, etc. But you have, you've got your opinion, I've got mine. We can go back and forth on this. I think we've got our trench line set up there. I want to get into other headlines. The National Guard sent up 4 spy planes to monitor protests in major cities. This is coming from the LA Times. 3 of the reconnaissance planes were overhead to watch protests over the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Phoenix, and Washington, D.C., with a 4th sent up over El Dorado Hills, an affluent suburb of Sacramento, California, that has no record of violent protests, but is home to the head of the California National Guard. That's Major General David S. Baldwin. This came out through some disgruntled reports from members of the National Guard who were like, why are we doing this? This is a waste of time and a waste of money. There's nothing going on here. It seems personal. And those orders, by the way, the ones to fly over El Dorado Hills, were given by Baldwin, by Major General Baldwin, again, the guy who lives there. So it seems like there might be a bit of a self-serving thing going on. Moving into foreign policy, President Trump has agreed to remove Sudan from the state sponsors of terror list after that country agreed to pay $335 million to U.S. terror victims and families. The payment relates to al-Qaeda's 1998 bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. Attacks conducted by Osama bin Laden's al-Qaeda network while bin Laden was living in Sudan. More than 500 of the 700 victims of the 1998 bombings at the U.S. embassies signed a letter rejecting this settlement offer from Sudan, partly because it would award more money to Americans than Africans who worked at the embassies. This weekend, the first ever delegation from Israel to Bahrain took place. That was on Sunday. And this morning, the first ever delegation from Israel to the United Arab Emirates is beginning. During the meeting, the first countries announced that along with the USA, they will set up a joint $3 billion investment fund headquartered in Jerusalem as part of efforts to normalize relations and promote regional economic development. We'll see how that goes. Broadly, more diplomacy is better if it weren't for the fact that, the United States and Israel were kind of vicious in a bunch of ways. We have guests on to talk about that pretty frequently. But, people getting along is good. I'm a diplomat in that sense. But I wish that some of this stuff were accounted for, Anyway, a bunch more news to get to. The Russian Foreign Ministry today said that country, the Russian Federation, is willing to sign a 1-year extension of its longstanding nuclear arms reduction treaty. New START. This, of course, is following recent comments from Putin to the same effect. I'm just going to quote here. Quote, Russia is suggesting that the New START treaty be extended by 1 year and is ready to undertake the political commitment alongside the United States for both sides to freeze the existing number of nuclear warheads during that period. This may be implemented if and only if it is understood that the freeze on the warheads will not be followed by any additional demands on part of the United States. Quote, end quote. We'll be talking about this, by the way, with Scott Ritter at 9:30 later on in the show. Our next headline, after the 13-year ban imposed by the United Nations Security Council came to an end on Sunday, the Iranian Foreign Ministry announced this is a ban on arms sales to Iran. The Iranian Foreign Ministry announced in a statement as part of Resolution 2231 of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. This has followed United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo warned individuals or entities not to sell Iran armaments. Came after the end of that ban on Sunday. Spokesperson from Iran's foreign ministry said that, quote, Pompeo's remarks are the most important sign that not even he believes unilateral U.S. sanctions have been successful and no UN sanctions have been reinstated, end quote. Kind of rubbing it in there, but hey, I hear where they're coming from. The U.S. unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA in May 2018, imposing waves of harsh economic sanctions on Iran. The latest came in early October when 18 Iranian banks were blacklisted, including those that process humanitarian trade transactions. This effectively severed Iran's financial sector from the global economy. And in my last headline here, Thailand has blocked some content from a TV station and media platform in the country, Voice TV, accusing it of spreading false information. This comes according to a request by the Digital Economy Ministry. Voice TV's CEO later issued a statement saying the company had yet to see the order and would continue to do its duty. This also comes on the tail of a weekend of serious civil unrest, with many demonstrators defying emergency bans on gatherings of 5 or more people, as about 10,000 people surrounded Bangkok's Victory Monument in the center of the country's capital. Speaking to reporters on Monday, the country's Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha said he supported the idea of Parliament holding an emergency session to find a way out of the current political crisis, but said the government must, quote, protect the monarchy, end quote. And that does seem to be at least one of the core disputes during this wave of protests, during this wave of demonstrations. We will see where that goes. Thailand standing out as one of the sort of last bastions of monarchy in the world, if you want to put it that way. And in any event, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Broadly, in my book, less monarchy is a better thing. But, you know, it's Thailand. It's not the United States. Kind of not my affair. In any event, we're going into a break here. We'll be back on the other side of this break with Jamarl Thomas's monologue. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines.
Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik. Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in DC. If you guys live in that area, you can catch us at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, definitely give us a like and share this content. If you want to join in on the conversation, definitely feel free to do so. You can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can call us at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. Feel free to call in. You know, one of the weirdest scenarios in 2016, in that election between Trump and Clinton, believe it or not, came after the election. It was when Clinton had just lost to reality show hosts, and they were seeking this rationale to explain how. Because on the day that Clinton lost, they had her winning, or her chances of winning, like 98% in Huffington Post. It wasn't that Clinton was running under a criminal investigation for like 2 years. It wasn't that she was the most hated candidate in the history of candidates up until the point that Donald Trump came on. It wasn't that she cheated Sanders. It wasn't the last minute revelation by Comey, even though they tried to explain it in that particular way. Nope. The reason that she lost was Trump was working with the Russians. And this was something that in the book Shattered, they made it very clear that within a couple of days, Clinton didn't seem to take any responsibility for that loss, and instead sought all of these other figures to blame it on, as opposed to blaming it on the thing that it actually was. Her failings as a candidate. It was on her. But even if you want to take it off her for the moment, the Clinton campaign was very clear in the book Shattered that they were going to use their communications to blame Trump and Russia as the reason to which they lost. Now, this goes back to the Brennan document that was released by D&I Ratcliffe that also made it clear that that was something that these guys were planning. They even tried to say that was Russian disinformation, despite the fact it was in Brennan's own handwriting. In this very specific instance, though, think of the things that Clinton could have blamed it on, legitimately blamed it on. They could have said it was interstate cross-check. They could have said it were voter ID laws. They could have said it was obscenely long waiting lines 5 hours or more, going outside the confines of even when these things are open, scrubbing people from the voter rolls, closing voter locations. And mind you, the last 3 were things that the Democrats themselves did to scrub out Sanders in that primary in 2016. They could have fought any of these things in the courts. Some of these places, like Wisconsin, was only by like a few, like maybe 10,000 votes or more. It was more than 10,000, but it was close to 10,000, like 40,000 or something to that effect. Small vote totals. But they didn't bring this up. They didn't point to the Republicans and squarely say, no, we're going to fight this in the courts. We're going to fight this with Jill Stein. They didn't do any of that. They screamed Russia. They screamed Russia, the Red Menace. Vladimir Putin riding a bear across the ocean, swimming bear. Yeah, that's what they went with. They didn't deal with, it was things internal to the country itself as the problem and as the responsible party. They went with a complete delegitimization campaign of Donald Trump using Russia to do so. When they use this term Russia, they're using it almost to denigrate it. And in the denigration of it, drag in other stuff with it. It's disgusting. They've used this a lot now, and this has become a motif, screaming disinformation as a way to disinform. The Hunter Biden stuff and the revelations that recently came out are also being hit with the same brush. This sounds like a political operations document from internal, meaning from the standpoint of Trump and from the standpoint of Giuliani, just in the way that the information was came out, of a repairman that gets a laptop and all this other stuff. It's bizarre. It makes more sense to believe that this is internal to the country. But what happened? Adam Schiff goes on Wolf Blitzer and screams Russia disinformation 5,000 times in 30 seconds. It's as if he was in a contest to see how many times can I say Russian disinformation in 30 seconds. Like it was a beer drinking contest behind the scenes that the public just didn't know about. It was horrible. The reality of it is, though, Joe Biden has been mum. The mainstream media has been out here fighting hard for Joe Biden on this, but Joe Biden has been mum. That was not a date that was scheduled. I want you to hear D.N.I. Ratcliffe one more time, because D.N.I. Ratcliffe makes it very clear, D.N.I. Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, makes it very clear this is not Russian disinformation. Let's hear the clip.
Tell us what's real and what's fake. Is this Russian disinformation, Director?
So, Maria, it's funny that some of the people that complain the most about intelligence being politicized are the ones politicizing intelligence. And unfortunately, in this case, it is Adam Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who, as you pointed out on Friday, said that the intelligence community believes that Hunter Biden's laptop and the emails on it are part of some Russian disinformation campaign. Let me be clear. The intelligence community doesn't believe that because there's no intelligence that supports that. And we have shared no intelligence with Chairman Schiff or any other member of Congress that Hunter Biden's laptop is part of some Russian disinformation campaign. It's simply not true. And this is exactly what I said I would stop when I became the Director of National Intelligence. And that's people using the intelligence community to leverage some political narrative. And in this case, apparently Chairman Schiff wants anything against his preferred political candidate to be deemed as not real, and is using the intelligence community, or attempting to use the intelligence community, to say there's nothing to see here. Don't drag the intelligence community into this. Hunter Biden's laptop is not part of some Russian disinformation campaign, and I think it's clear that the American people know that.
Now they're going to say that D.N.I. Ratcliffe is part of Russian disinformation. It never ends. Understand why they do this. They did this in 2016 to, A, delegitimize Trump, to make it look like his win wasn't, in fact, an actual win. And they carried this on for the last 3 years with this notion of almost a soft coup. Right now, they're using it in the same way. Calling something Russian disinformation, I hate to tell you, has become, in and of itself, American disinformation. Shane, the media has been fighting for Joe Biden on this harder than Joe Biden has been fighting for Joe Biden on this. How weird. It seems like he's gone mum. And do you think this matters? I guess that's the question. I don't think it does, because I think the public has wed to their people. But do you think I'm wrong on that?
I think that they're actually, I think in the political arena, you're pretty much just dealing with people who are already wed, to use your term. But outside of the political arena, including in terms of a lot of the people who are going to be voting, and I believe that there are a lot of people who are going to be voting who, don't follow politics all that closely, I think this could matter. I think if this comes up during the debate specifically, the media blackout won't matter so much because people will start to be like, hey, what the heck is he talking about? And, even then there are questions about whether they start to look into it. Are they going to be disinformed? At this point, though, with the DNI coming out, I think a lot of, with the DNI coming out and saying this is not Russian disinfo, I think a lot of people who would have fallen for that argument might not fall for it because there's a back and forth. At least there's a sort of tug of perspectives going on where usually there is none. So yeah, if Trump brings it up during the debate, I think that would be a coup for him if he does it well. And if he does it in a way that gets people interested in the story. And this really is the October surprise. We'll see, though, if Democrats or the media drop anything in between now and Thursday, because that might drown that out, too.
Well, it sounds like they may have something else. Like, when they start leaking this, because I got to be honest, the Russian disinformation stuff at this point is getting aggravating. It's appalling and it's xenophobic. I want to call it racist because that's the way it feels. They basically are using a country as this kind of prop of denigration in order to castigate anything they don't like. And they paint this stuff with this brush, and you have Democrats who basically accept it as is. And the problem that I see with this is that if a Democrat gets in office, that momentum and energy doesn't just stop. That momentum keeps going with a bunch of rabid Democrats that are, just like Republicans, blaming outside influence for their own failings. And all of these, like, I don't know if you've heard, like, Ro-Khanna. Ro-Khanna was like, yeah, man, we're talking about packing the court. And Republicans put this many people in while blocking Obama. And it's like, dude, that's their job. That's what they're supposed to do. Like, they are things that they're basically classifying things external that are internal to the country itself. And, it's your own failings. Deal with your own failings.
It is your own failings. You got to deal with the hypocrisy, but of course hypocrites don't like to deal with their own hypocrisy. That's kind of where the hypocrisy thing comes in. I mean, you say that they carry that, I forget exactly the term, but that momentum. If they're anti-Russian going into power in an attempt to gain power, they, in an abstract sense, really the Democrats here, and if they get power, that's not going to stop there. The Russian antagonism, that'll be matched. That'll carry itself forward, and it won't stop with Russia. It'll carry forward to Iran too. Of course, we've had enough of that, and it'll be applied to China as well. I mean, really, what's going on here is just trying to maintain American military and economic supremacy around the world. This is a little bit of a tangent, but we're kind of going up against a break here, so I'm going to take it this way. I think we need to come up with a real, legitimate, genuine cross-base argument, like not a polarized argument, for why it is not good for America or for Americans to have this empire thing going on anymore. I think that we've sort of lost that way. And we've had guests on who've given us good arguments. Actually, a while back, Alex Craner, I guess we had on yesterday, he was talking about endogenous growth and how instead of sort of spending a bunch of money, spending a bunch of effort, trying to maintain our military around the world, trying to maintain these multilateral trade organizations that aren't so multilateral and don't actually help our trade that much, there's a lot more if we just start to invest in our country. And I think there's a real frickin' argument to be made there. But sadly, like the only people that I hear making that occasionally are people like Rand Paul in the political arena. If we had more of that, if we had a sort of economic philosophical basis for that stuff, I could see a real change in our political system. But as it is, each party is a war party. With Russia, I mean, with the Democrats, it's Russia. With the Republicans, it's China. And that's not stopping, and they're each kind of converging now. They're both Democrats and Republicans are also against, they're just against everybody, basically, everybody who isn't America or the EU, apparently. But in any event,
that's the
you've got to go into a break.
I think that's a feature of a declining empire. Honestly, I do. I don't think you do that, and if your system is doing great. No, I think you do that when your system is failing.
I believe in phoenixes.
Yeah.
I believe in phoenixes. I believe that we have the ability to come back. I think that, yeah, different nations, different people, different agents or organizations have done that thing. They've come back to life. And I think it's time for us to start thinking about how we can do that, and quickly, on our own soil, on our own ground. In any event, we've got to go into a break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. Back in just a minute.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We're joined now by our guest, Dr. Michael Neverdakis. He's a teacher at the American College of Greece. Dr. Neverdakis, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Glad to be back on.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us. All right. You know what? I want to start here. You recently moved to Sweden. We were talking about this, and we want to talk about COVID there. But I actually wanted to talk with you briefly about Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus. So Turkey and Greece with an ongoing naval dispute over oil drilling rights, and then Turkey more recently getting involved in Nagorno-Karabakh, this long-standing frozen conflict just to the east of Turkey. They're backing Azerbaijan, and broadly, it seems like Turkey is sort of making a slight mess of things in the wider NATO sphere. This comes, of course, as they are the largest military member of NATO in Europe. Dr. Neverdakis, I know you lived in Greece for a while. I'm just curious, before we get into a conversation about Sweden, and COVID should be very interesting, what's your take on what's going on over there? I know, again, you used to live in Greece. You have, certain affiliations, but I'm curious, what do you think about recent events?
Well, it's really a very complicated issue, but I'll try to break it down very quickly. I mean, Turkey right now is involved in conflict at some level in several countries in the region. You mentioned Armenia and Azerbaijan. You mentioned their naval ships coming into Greek waters, and they're trying to get oil drilling rights in the Aegean Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. So they're doing the same thing to waters that belong to Cyprus. They occupy almost 40% of Cyprus, and Cyprus is a sovereign country that's a EU member state. They've been involved, of course, in Syria, and they have troops in Libya as well. So it really seems that their president, Erdogan, is going all out to try to fill what might be some type of power vacuum in the region. As the U.S. withdraws troops from several countries and U.S. influence in the region wanes, it seems that Erdogan is trying to raise his profile in the region. So that's what's going on in a nutshell in the wider region. In Greece, there's a long-standing issue over the Greek continental shelf. The same is true with the Cypriot continental shelf. Turkey claims that it has rights over it and over the oil and gas that is likely to be below the seabed. Greece makes a show of opposing this, but the Greek government has done some very dangerous things recently. They said, for instance, that we would like to take our disputes, the disputes between Greece and Turkey, to the International Court in The Hague. But what that actually does is it opens up the door for disputing certain treaties, like the Treaty of Lausanne from 1922, that have been set in stone as part of international law for almost a century. So this opens up the possibility that Turkey might be able to make some claims that will then things might go their way in the international court. So let me just say this, and I'll kind of just illustrate the Greek government's mentality toward Turkey. The Greek government supports EU membership for Turkey probably more than Turkey does at this time. And next year, 2021, is the 200th anniversary of the opening battles of Greek independence against what was then the Ottoman Empire. And the honored guest, apparently, for this 200-year anniversary celebration that's going to take place is the Turkish president, Erdogan. But the thing that's really mind-blowing is that one of the drill ships that he's sending into the Aegean was actually apparently sold to him by one of the Greek big ship owners and oligarchs. So unfortunately, behind the scenes, there's a lot of give and take between the two sides. And it seems that the conflict, while at some level it's real, it's also a great distraction from COVID, from a poor economy in both countries and things like that.
Let me ask you this. Is it possible that the reason why they want it more than Turkey itself is because they want leverage? That basically they believe if Turkey was in the EU, there would be leverage over Turkey within the context of the EU over those issues, over the oil drilling rights and some of the other issues, Cyprus and everything else. Right now, you're basically dealing with
Yes. That's an excellent point. I think that's what proponents of Cyprus joining the EU back in 2004 were saying. They were saying that if Cyprus joins the European Union, it will be an EU member state. It'll have the backing of the rest of the EU in its issue with the Turkish occupation in the north of Cyprus. And unfortunately, 16 years later, nothing has happened on that front. And the EU doesn't seem particularly warm towards Cyprus on that issue. The same thing is going on now. There's been various talks that have taken place between Greece, Cyprus, and Turkey at an EU level. And the EU, there's 5 or 6 countries that consistently refuse to impose any sanctions on Turkey, depending on their own government's interests with Turkey. So those countries include at various times Germany, Italy, Hungary, and a few others. I don't have the list in front of me. But there's no real reason to believe that if Turkey were to become an EU member, that stance would really change, unfortunately, on the part of the EU and its member states.
It's an interesting one of the other things you said towards the tail end of your great overview, by the way, is that this is almost an entertainment. This is a distraction. At what level do you think that's operating on? Do you see this as a distraction for the political leaders themselves? Do you see this as a sort of weird public gladiatorial show combat for the sake of the public? Or is it just, like I was implying in the beginning there, is it just that the leaders themselves are kind of bored and in some sense deranged? That's maybe a naive way of putting it, but what's your take, Dr. Neverdakis?
Well, it's definitely at the public level, at some level in both countries. I can't speak so much about Turkey, but I know that their economy really has not been doing well in recent years. Everyone has talked about the Greek economy, but the Turkish economy has really gone down a cliff during that period as well. Unemployment rate in both countries are very similar from what I've seen. In Greece, the economy is definitely part of it. If you consider, for instance, that tourism this year was down about 3/4, and tourism accounts for about 1/3 of Greece's GDP. You can imagine what a big hit it's taken. And the real signs of economic slowdown have not really shown up in Greece yet, because there's still a bit of a safety net from various government programs, but that's not going to last forever. So there is a distraction at some level on the days where the conflict sort of heats up with Turkey again. You visit the various Greek news portals online, and it's almost like there's no such thing as COVID in the world, because it's all about Turkey. And then, of course, the issue with COVID comes back. But it does work sort of as a bit of a distraction, if nothing else. I mean, being in Greece the past 8 years, there were several instances where this was going on. My honest opinion is I don't think we're going to see a conflict between Greece and Turkey the way that we're seeing one between Armenia and Azerbaijan right now. But you never know for sure. I won't stake my life on it, but I just don't sense it's going to happen.
What's the political position of the public itself on this issue? Is the public behind the government? I mean, I guess I'm curious about media and public perception of what is taking place in regards to Turkey. Is there a certain degree of consternation in the public where they're concerned about a military altercation between Turkey? Like how far, how deep does this dig into the public?
Well, I think that the public in Greece, at least, is not very happy with these policies. And they're not just policies of the current government, by the way. They've pretty much been standard for the last several governments across different parties. I don't really think, on the one hand, that the Greek public is very happy about this, because there's always a sense that Greece is the one that is giving in. Greece is the one that is appeasing Turkey rather than the other way around. At the same time, there's no way that most people in Greece, other than really very hardcore nationalists, want war, for instance. And there's a lot of people worried about that being a possibility and what that will do to a country that has already been decimated economically for the past decade.
And how do you see Greece having responded to the conversion of the Hagia Sophia back to a mosque? Just as a sort of big emblematic event.
I'm glad you brought that up, actually. That's part of this overall conflict that's going on. And honestly, the way that I would describe the response from the state is that other than a few public statements, there doesn't seem to have been anything done. It's almost forgotten. It was a very tepid response overall, but I can say that the public really did not like that. Even a lot of people that are, they're very much in favor of great relations with Turkey or friendship with the Turkish people, and are total doves when it comes to any sort of conflict, did not see that as a positive development, because it's, that goes way beyond just military or political differences. That's a cultural site that is very important, not just to Greece and its history and the Greek culture, but it's considered part of the global cultural heritage. So that was something that was really unpopular, but the response officially was very tepid.
What is the EU's response? I mean, is the EU really going to allow one of its member states to get into a conflict with Turkey?
I mentioned before that several countries refused to place sanctions on Turkey. The unfortunate truth, at least from the Greek perspective, is that Turkey is very important economically. There's very strong trade relations between certain European countries and Turkey. One of those countries is Germany, which of course has such a dominant position within the EU and the Eurozone. So as long as that continues, it doesn't seem like there's going to be much of a response in any sort of really coordinated way. The country that seems to have been the most outspoken against Turkey has been France, interestingly enough, with their President Macron. Of course, there's self-interest there. France has gotten a lot of drilling rights, especially in the waters off of Cyprus. And they are not interested in having an aggressive Turkey breathing down their necks. So there is self-interest there, but they have spoken out. So there's a bit of a divide now. There's kind of like the German camp and the French camp in the EU. France being more in favor of some type of action against Turkey. Other countries, because of better trade relations that they have with Turkey, are trying to placate Turkey and not take any official steps.
We are joined by Dr. Michael Neverdakis. He's an American teacher at the College of Greece. A teacher at the American College of Greece. Dr. Neverdakis, when we come back, we're going to be turning to Sweden, the topic of COVID in Sweden. You, I believe, recently moved to Sweden, actually. And from what you were telling me, the situation there on the ground is not being reported accurately. We're going to be talking about that on the other side of this break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, joined by Dr. Michael Neverdakis. We will be back with him in just a minute. Be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people.
where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and our guest, Dr. Michael Neverdakis. He's a teacher at the American College of Greece. And by the way, you can follow Michael on Twitter at Neverdakis. I'm going to spell that out for you. That is Nevradakis, Neverdakis, spelled just like that. Dr. Neverdakis, thank you again for being with us. Like I was saying as we were going into the break, you were telling me that you had recently moved to Sweden. I'm just curious, how long ago did you get there? What did you heard about the country before you arrived? And how were your sort of impressions broken? What did you learn after you got there?
Well, it's been a fascinating experience. I mean, I had heard a little bit about Sweden and its different response to COVID than most other countries, but hearing it is one thing, seeing it in front of you is another, because you always have to assume that the media exaggerates in one way or another. So seeing it up close is really the best way to sort of make a judgment for yourself as to what's going on. So being here for almost a month now, what I've seen is practically no masks. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that maybe 1 in 500 people wears a mask. I mean, just no one wears them. They're not mandated anywhere. And beyond that, businesses are all up and running, whether it's shopping malls or movie theaters. Schools and universities are operating. There are measures. I mean, for instance, sporting events are taking place behind closed doors without fans. Really large gatherings are not taking place. Some businesses voluntarily have chosen to curtail their hours or to limit capacity indoors. But there's no official mandates for any of these things. So people go about their lives quite normally. And I have to say, aside from those observations, my other observation, first of all, is, if masks save lives and everywhere else they've been mandated, and yet all those countries, including Greece, are now claiming to be in the middle of a second wave. Well, bodies should be piling up on the street here in Sweden. They're not. And not only is that not happening, but I have to say that, since it's my personal observation, in the 3 or so weeks that I've been here, I feel healthier than I've felt in several years. And the reason for that is, first of all, the mask was really making me sick, and I actually had a mask exemption, a legitimate one. And it was just not being recognized in Greece, even by my own employer, even though the law required them to. They didn't do it anyway. Beyond that, just the whole stressful situation of hearing the media every day saying there might be a lockdown tomorrow, there might be a lockdown next week. And then people sort of policing other people and saying, you're not wearing your mask correctly, or why aren't you wearing a mask, or things like that. It was just getting unbearable. So getting away from that situation has done wonders for me, I felt. And the people that I see around me, I don't know what they're feeling like inside, but I see a lot of healthy looking people, more than I do in Greece and more than I did in the US as well. I was in the US for 4 months this year.
I don't understand what you mean by I've seen healthy-looking people in the context of a place with a virus. I understand what you mean when you say, you have your issues with the mask, and that you don't necessarily like the stress of a potential shutdown or this or that. But that's life. I mean, life is always going to have things that impinge upon and change your schedule and change your way of operation. That can happen at any particular moment. It's just happened on a grand scale. And the reports are from Sweden that they are talking about locking down some of the areas in the country. Now, you're there. Are they talking about that? And if so, how does that deal with what you're saying? Because if the government of Sweden has said, okay, we're going to try to get some areas to lock down locally, that would indicate that they are also dealing with a new wave.
Right. I'm glad that you brought that up too. What the media, the international media, has been reporting as Sweden suddenly having this about face and saying we might do some local lockdowns is totally exaggerated. The real news, right, from Sweden is that the government has basically given, or will be giving this week, authority to the local regions and the regional governments to add some measures of their own in addition to the national measures. But they also announced a list of what those measures might be, and they're all recommendations. So for instance, let's say like the Stockholm regional government would have the ability to issue recommendations to citizens in that region to avoid taking public transportation, let's say, or to avoid going to bars late at night. But nothing there is a mandate. And also nothing in that list includes anything about wearing masks. So I don't know how this got translated by the international media as a lockdown is coming to Sweden, but Sweden seems to be very far away from that. These will all be, like, they're calling them stronger recommendations, and they will probably have some effect. And that's probably what they're counting on the part of the public, that, you know, certain people might change their behavior just a little bit and avoid things like unnecessary movements or very big crowds, because you still see some big crowds. But they're not going to lock anyone down in their homes. They're not going to close businesses down. That is absolutely not in what they announced at all. And the feeling that I've gotten just from ordinary Swedes that I've been getting to know and speaking to is that they don't think that this, you know, this far into the whole situation, that the government is just going to do a total 180 on it. And they think it'll be very kind of a dangerous thing for the government to do as well. Sweden has a very weak coalition government, from what I understand, and, you know, something like that could cost them, you know, their ability to govern. So more forceful recommendations are coming on the local level. They also said that these are things that absolutely have to remain in place only for a limited time. They're very clear about that, whereas in other places, everything that is announced is indefinite. And that seems to be it. I mean, I can't take an oath on this and say that they're not going to totally change their policies later on, but that's not what they announced right now.
And just to be clear here, I guess two things here real quick. Like you're saying, these are recommendations. These are strong recommendations, but they're not regulations. They're not mandating that you need to wear a mask in certain places or that you need to avoid congregating in certain places. Like, a quick question here. Are there any fines, for instance? Are there any penalties that people would face if they were to break these recommendations?
There's none, and there's still going to be none, even with these stronger local recommendations. So there's no real legal sanctions against people to comply with these recommendations, because they're just recommendations. They don't really have any sort of legal weight behind them. I did hear that there's talk about passing some type of pandemic-related law, but even that law, essentially, just from the few details that I read, there's not that much news in English on Sweden, but the few details that I read, it just seems like more of the same. It's not authorizing the government to sort of lock people down or anything like that, nor was there any sort of mention about fining people or arresting people or anything like that. I really don't think that is something that's on the radar over here. So they're relying more on people to do the right thing, in a sense, that to use sort of common sense and precautions that one would use or should use even during like cold and flu season. And I think to a large part, they've struck a good balance, because people do go out. You see restaurants and cafes and bars there. They have a lot of people in them. But, you know, most businesses also, like restaurants, they might have like every other table empty, or they'll just space you out in such a way that you're not too close to other parties. There's like a lot of that going on at a local level. But the overall impact is that it does not really change people's lives too much. It's not like a big disruption in people's lives. I think the other thing that's also helpful is that, like public transportation, for instance, the buses run very frequently. So there's rarely like a big crowd waiting for a bus. So that reduces crowding. Whereas in Athens, where I was until recently, the government talks about protecting public health, and then buses run like once an hour, and they show up and they're like sardine cans, basically. So anything, mandated or not, goes out the window in those things. So there's that as well. There's like an infrastructure in place that just is very efficient, and it kind of helps the process along. But I also know that other countries have efficient infrastructures, and yet they went ahead and did stricter measures. So that's not the only part of the equation.
I'm interested. Well, I guess I'm interested in two things, but I'll skip to the other part. I mean, but let me just say it this way. You would agree that if the government is adding any kind of local suggestions, they're not doing it for no reason. They're doing it because they're seeing an uptick. And Sweden, compared to its neighbors, did worse in regards to the number of deaths and the number of people who are infected. Is that true?
Yes, well, there's a couple of caveats over here. There's an uptick in cases, but on most days, Sweden doesn't have any deaths at all. Or on all of the other days, deaths nationwide are in single digits. In fact, I believe they're in single digits over the past 2 weeks. At the same time that in Greece, for instance, where there's been masks almost everywhere and a curfew placed on a lot of different types of businesses, and movie theaters shut down and things like that, there's been over 70 deaths during that same period. So Sweden had a lot of deaths in the beginning, but, and I'm not saying this is a good thing, but most of those deaths, more than half, I think more than 2/3, were nursing homes. The average age of those who died, and this was with COVID, not from COVID, was 86. So if you look at states like New York, New Jersey, California, Michigan, and Washington State, they had many thousands of nursing home deaths as well. And yet what I was hearing, for instance, in the US over the summer when I was there, is that, for instance, Cuomo, the governor of New York, should run for president, and that his leadership of New York during the whole early months of the pandemic was an example to be followed. So, he had more nursing homes than Sweden did, and yet he was given a hero's treatment, and Sweden was sort of treated as the black sheep. So, there's definitely something there that's going on, and then most of the countries that had the strictest measures, the UK, Belgium, which is very close to Sweden as well, and then Italy, Spain, even countries like Peru, like the harshest lockdown countries, and also the US as well, with like different approaches in different areas, more deaths per million than Sweden at this time. And overall, most of those countries had more deaths per million throughout this whole situation. So there's a lot of variables at play. Sweden has a much older population, from what I understand, than its neighbors. And Stockholm is a rather densely populated city. It has a similar population density to a city like Manchester, for instance, which is now going to under threat of lockdown.
That is fair.
Dr. Neverdakis. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We're running out of time, but I really appreciate you being willing to join us, and hopefully we can get you back on soon.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, for those listening, that was Dr. Michael Neverdakis, teacher at the American College of Greece. Thank you so much for joining us. You can follow Michael on Twitter at Neverdakis, that is spelled Nevradakis. We will be back in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break here. I mean, Jamarl, very briefly, very interesting to hear that report on the ground.
Yes.
And in a weird way, we should have this conversation on the other side of the break later on in the show, maybe at the end of the show. But I think that could be a model for how the United States could have handled this. I think that would have been uniquely fitted to our sense and pursuit of freedoms and local control, local autonomy. But that's a topic for another time. We'll be back in a minute.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the Untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to some headlines in the news. The Commission on Presidential Debates said it's reversing its rules for the debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump this Thursday in Tennessee. Will be changing its rules so that they have 2 minutes of uninterrupted time at the beginning of each 15-minute response segment. And during that time, each candidate will only have his mic on for the time he's allotted to speak. The Trump re-election campaign released a statement last night agreeing to the change while accusing the commission of bias. You're not letting me speak when I'm not supposed to speak. That's not fair. During a campaign rally in Prescott, Arizona, Donald Trump slammed Joe Biden in the upcoming November presidential elections. Democratic candidate Joe Biden as quote-unquote corrupt, reproaching his son Hunter Biden as having a laptop from hell, quote-unquote. Let's play the clip for that.
Joe Biden is always and has been a corrupt politician. And as far as I'm concerned, the Biden family is a criminal enterprise. If you read this laptop, I tell you what, this is called the laptop from hell. The only laptop that was almost as good, maybe worse, was the laptop of Anthony Weiner. Do you remember that? Ding, 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 ding.
Calling it a criminal enterprise for some reason is utterly hilarious to me. I'm following remarks from Adam Schiff on Friday that the release of media from the laptop was part of a Russian election interference campaign. I think he used the word disinformation, Russian disinformation. Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe said the intelligence community doesn't believe that because there is no intelligence that supports that. Meaning Schiff just made it up. Let's play the clip from that one also of DNI Ratcliffe.
Us what's real and what's fake. Is this Russian disinformation, Director?
So, Maria, it's funny that some of the people that complain the most about intelligence being politicized are the ones politicizing intelligence. And unfortunately, in this case, it is Adam Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who, as you pointed out on Friday, said that the intelligence community believes that Hunter Biden's laptop and the emails on it are part of some Russian disinformation campaign. Let me be clear. The intelligence community doesn't believe that because there's no intelligence that supports that. And we have shared no intelligence with Chairman Schiff or any other member of Congress that Hunter Biden's laptop is part of some Russian disinformation campaign. It's simply not true. And this is exactly what I said I would stop when I became the director of national intelligence. And that's people using the intelligence community to leverage some political narrative. And in this case, apparently Chairman Schiff wants anything against his preferred political candidate to be deemed as not real and is using the intelligence community or attempting to use the intelligence community to say there's nothing to see here. Don't drag the intelligence community into this. Hunter Biden's laptop is not part of some Russian disinformation campaign, and I think it's clear that the American people know that.
Basically, Shane, Adam Schiff just lied, just like Adam Schiff lied before. And if you listen to the clip, go back, I encourage everybody, listen to the clip with Schiff and Wolf Blitzer. Adam Schiff says Russian disinformation like 1,000 times. Like he says it over and over and over and over and over again. But, as a propagandistic tactic that if you say it 1,000 times, people will leave, not remembering what you said, just remembering Russian disinfo. Meaning, if you get people in a subconscious way to leave with that feeling, then, you've accomplished your objective and your mission in that thing. And by the way, it's one thing. The only thing that matters in this is if it's true. Is it true Is the email legit? Are the emails that are on the laptop legit? It doesn't even matter if it arrived at the person at that repairman shop in the way that the person said it arrived. All that matters is if it's true. And Joe Biden has been mysteriously quiet. Shane?
It's awkward. I wonder how he'll do at the debates. I wonder if he'll just try to dismiss it if Trump brings it up, you know?
You know, I suspect that's where it's going to go. Well, right, because it's the problem that Joe Biden has is that this is intellectually or intuitively true, right? Like, if you are the viceroy in the Ukraine, you have absolute control. You're even constructing their government. You're sitting in on meetings. You're Joe Biden. Your kid is been made part of the management team of Burisma, this energy company that is corrupt, despite the fact that he has no experience in oil and gas or experience in the Ukraine. And he is making a healthy chunk of change while doing it. And, you know, reports of him, let's say, doing illegal activities in regards to drugs while on that job. The idea that he doesn't talk to his dad just seems weird to me, right? I mean, if your dad was the head of a company, you wouldn't casually, not even at dinner at one point, at Christmas dinner, you never, like, to say you never bring it up comes across just like Loretta Lynch and Bill Clinton's tarmac meeting, where Bill Clinton supposedly didn't bring up the fact that his wife was being charged with a crime, or potentially charged with a crime. It just doesn't pass the mustard.
Well, and another side of this is a couple of years ago during the earlier stages of Trump's presidency, there was a phase there where what the left media or what most of the media was talking about, as far as I remember, was Trump and emoluments and his personal businesses and his family running his businesses and all this stuff. I mean, it's just hypocrisy. You get what I'm saying? You'd think that they would be leveling the same charges if they're honest political players against Biden, against Hunter Biden. It's the same thing. In this case, though, it's arguably even worse because it's not just dealing with other countries. It's not just dealing with foreign countries. You don't want that influence. This isn't a company in the U.S. This isn't something where you're personally enriching yourself. This is going to affect our relationships with other major players around the globe. It's also the fact that, again, we don't talk about this, that we overthrew the government of Ukraine, used that government to launder misinformation through the Black Ledger, through Sergei Lyshenko, against Trump during his electoral campaign in 2016. This whole thing, it's so damn messy. Once you start digging, there's a lot of nasty treasure beneath the surface of it. There's a lot that's being covered up.
And I suspect our media doesn't want to touch that because it impugns the system itself. Meaning, you know, they're okay with saying Trump and Russia. They're okay with attacking China. They're okay with attacking Iran and, you know, countries that we don't particularly like. But turning the focus on the country itself to deal with the real concerns of the country itself seems to be off the table. I mean, that just doesn't seem to be something that they're willing to do. I don't know if you remember, back in 2016, they had Jill Stein on television. And they asked Jill Stein, hey, it seems that you're taking a Russian perspective. And Jill Stein makes the point of like, look, all that matters is whether or not it's true. And there seems to be problems. But he was like, yeah, but aren't you concerned that you're impugning the electoral system of the United States? Did he say that? No. They were said the Sanders campaign manager, Weaver. When they were bringing up issues with the way that they were doing the elections. They seem to care more about the appearance of the elections as opposed to the integrity of the elections themselves. And that's just so warped. It really is. But let's keep going. President Trump reportedly slammed White House, well, didn't reportedly, he did. There's audio tape of President Trump slamming White House coronavirus task force leader Anthony Fauci in a campaign call, calling him a disaster. This comes after Fauci said he predicted Trump would get COVID while watching a public appearance in which he was surrounded by people in which few were wearing masks. The National Guard set up 4 spy planes to monitor protests in major cities, with 3 of the reconnaissance planes overhead to watch protests over the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Phoenix, Washington, and D.C., with a 4th set up over El Dorado Hills and affluent suburbs of Sacramento, California, that has no record of violent protests, but is home to the head of the California National Guard, Major General David S. Baldwin. President Trump has agreed to remove Sudan from the state sponsors of terror lists after the country agreed to pay $335 million to the United States terror victims and families. The payment relates to Al Qaeda's 1998 bombing of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. Attacks conducted by Osama bin Laden's Al Qaeda network while bin Laden was living in Sudan. More than 500 of the 700 victims in the 1998 bombings at the U.S. embassy signed a letter rejecting Sudan's settlement offer, partly because it would award more money to America than Africans who work there. Shane, this is a shakedown. Let's be honest. This is a shakedown. Give us the money, I'll let you off the terror list. And for Donald Trump's benefit, towards the election, he can say, I'm getting money to the U.S. terror victims and families. It's like, well, wait a minute. Didn't more Sudanese? Yeah, they're not voting. The people who are voting are the American public, and I'm going to be able to say that this is what I did for you. It's a shakedown. Am I wrong?
It's blood money. It's a revival of the thousands-year-old practice of blood money, and it's just as ugly now as it was then. You'd think that we would have developed better, less punitive, more retributive means of justice, but apparently that's where we are. We just want the cash tomorrow.
Yeah, give us the cash, and we'll let you off the list. It's utterly sad. First ever delegation from Israel to the UAE is beginning this morning. During the meeting, the country announced, along with the United States, that they'll set up a joint $3 billion investment fund headquartered in Jerusalem as part of its efforts to normalize relations and promote regional economic development to invest in projects in the Middle East and North Africa. Interesting. The Russian Foreign Ministry said today that the country is willing to sign a one-year extension of its long-standing nuclear arms reduction treaty, New START. To quote, Russia is suggesting that the New START be extended by 1 year and is ready to undertake the political commitment alongside the United States for both sides to freeze, quote unquote, the existing number of nuclear warheads during that period. This may be implemented if and only if it is understood that the freeze on the warheads would not be followed by any additional demands on the part of the United States. Now, why are they wrong for that? I don't think they are. Basically, they're saying, look, let's extend this for a year, because at the very least, it allows additional time for negotiation. And let's be very clear, this is important. I mean, these treaties that Trump has been pulling out of, I suspect that part of the reason he's been pulling out of is because of pressure from Democrats. That you have a situation where they're attacking him, and his response to this is to push back against the attacks that he's close to Russia, and he does this by, pulling out of treaties that have the United States working in alignment with Russia, despite the fact that he got in office under the notion that he was going to be conciliatory towards the country. So, look, to me, this makes good sense. I would imagine the same to you, Shane. It gives time to actually think about it and come up with some way of moving forward without necessarily basically letting another treaty fall apart. We have about a minute and a half, but what do you think, Shane?
I agree. Yeah, no, I agree on that. Broadly, more arms reduction, less war is a good thing that we should be pushing for. I mean, that's pretty much the blanket thing, unless you're trying to entrench some unjust order, in which case, you should do that while you're engaging in diplomatic negotiations that are going to resolve that underlying conflict. Unless that's the case, then, all other things considered, we should push for more of that, especially when the world hangs in the balance with literal nukes, nuclear weapons. I still, more headlines, but I still can't help but wonder why we haven't all died in some nuclear holocaust.
That's right, I know, right? It's been a mistake. I mean, according to, Daniel Eisenberg, it's just dumb luck that we haven't been destroyed. Let's do this. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Yeah, it's dumb luck. In one case, I remember there was a Russian story where the guy held the other two members on the sub with his gun because they thought they were in a nuclear missile strike. Have you heard about this one? I mean, some of the stories are just by luck, there but go the grace of God, type stories where either people of good conscience, just intervened in what should have been a mechanical process of our
Or
destruction.
Stanislav Petrov.
Yes.
Look into Petrov Day. Literally, there's a celebratory holiday named after this guy Stanislav Petrov, who received orders, false orders. They thought that on the Soviet side, they thought that there were nuclear weapons inbound, and he thought, hey, this probably isn't the case. He held off on hitting the button, so to speak, and who knows how many millions of lives, tens, hundreds of millions of lives, were saved by him not doing that. But we shouldn't have put people in those positions. I mean, there's only so much to complain about anyway, Jamarl.
No, I agree with you. God, man, I want to get into this conversation. But put a pin in this with Scott Ritter, because this conversation of like nuclear reductions, will country give up their advantages? All of those things are fascinating. Let's do this. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're running a little bit late because we're running our mouth, but we will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And our guest for this segment, Pete, the tech guy in Jemmy. He is the author of Hail Mary, the Perfect Protestant and Catholic Prayer, and host of Your Prayer Intentions. That airs on WQPH 89.3 in Shirley-Fitchburg, Massachusetts, Saturdays at noon Eastern. Also go over and check out his blog, thetechguyblog.com. And that is, by the way, DA.techguyblog. I like the informality there, Pete. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing all right. Well, I'm always doing good on this particular date because it's my youngest's birthday. So it's a pleasant memory. I remember him.
Oh man!
So
wish him a happy birthday from Fault Lines.
I will when he gets up. He had a long day at work yesterday, but that's all right. It's been a good life. You got a good wife. You got good and honorable men as sons. What more does a person need? And speaking of books, sometime next year you'll be seeing a second book from me called, it'll actually be written by me and my wife, 33 Tips to Stay Married 33 Years.
That's awesome. So that's looking forward to it.
Give us one. Give us the top one. What's your top tip? I mean, my wife and I have been together for maybe 8-9 years at this point. How do we get to 33? Well, that's assuming I live that long.
Well, hopefully you did tip number one, which is choose wisely. But the epilogue tip is that to decide to stay married 33 years. So you have to decide that you want to be married. But for me, the biggest tip is to know what hills to die on. You have to know that is this a hill to die on? Is this not a hill to die on? And there's some hills that you have to die on. There's some hills you don't. And most of life, most of the things that cause trouble in marriages are hills not worth dying on, in my opinion. But there'll be more of that in the book. You can actually see parts of it on the blog. Just Google 30 tips, because it was originally going to be 30 tips to stay married 30 years, but I'm a procrastinator.
I got to be honest, Choose Wisely seemed to be the only one that book needs. Right? But,
well, I'm the piker in my family. I've been married 33 years. My older brother has been married 37. My parents were married 40. My oldest brother's been married 50. All the men in my family are keepers.
Wow, that's astonishing. I mean, when I think back over my family, I don't think maybe a few people in my family were married but not many, and the marriages weren't necessarily happy marriages. So I commend you on that. That's
Oh, thank you very much. Well, I give a lot of credit to the wife for putting up with me.
Same here. Same here.
Good words. That's probably a good idea. And, very happy to put up with you. Thank you so much for joining us, Pete.
Well, thank
we brought
you
you on today. Hey, thank you. Well, we brought you on today to talk about Hunter Biden's emails. This is as the debate's coming up in 2 days. We've been covering this. Revelations from the New York Post last week. This appears to be a drip campaign with more to come. Some would say a lot more to come. That's according to Steve Bannon, who's usually right. I don't like the guy personally. He's not going to use the 4-letter word here, but he's kind of a mean dude. But when he talks about stories, when he says that he has more on the way, I tend to believe him. And, revelations here include foreign dealings, very tightly linked to the Biden, to the Obama administration through Vice President Biden at the time, where the Burisma scandal is coming back up. But there are also, of course, scandalous pictures, scandalous media, and again, more to come. Now, what we were talking about yesterday, Pete, was this idea, does it even matter? Like, if there's a media blackout in place, if the New York Post is covering it, but not just other mainstream media outlets, but like Twitter and Facebook are censoring the New York Post. Twitter has blocked, last I checked, it was 6 tweets about this from the New York Post's account, saying that they violated, an arbitrary policy that they put into place, apparently to handle this story itself. Does it matter? Are these, if a news story comes out and nobody has access to it, does it even exist? It's that kind of a tree falling in the forest question. What's your take, Pete?
Well, my take is that the story is the censorship. I mean, let's be blunt. Full disclosure, I've known Steve Bannon for years. I haven't seen him in several years, but he's always been nice to me and has always had nice things to say about me. So I'm a little biased in terms of Mr. Bannon. But I think if this had not been censored by Facebook and Twitter, it would have been a one-day story, because the idea that the drug-addicted son of a guy who got rich despite being in government for 47 years is being greased, nobody would be surprised at this. I mean, 100 years ago, people were doing stuff like this. No one at all would have been surprised by it. It would have been a one-day story. It would have been a throwaway line in the debates. Nobody would have cared. Or at least nobody who wasn't already decided would have cared. I mean, not that the stuff isn't serious. I think it's very serious. But Hunter's already out there. When Facebook and Twitter decided to censor this, that's when the story broke out. You even had Jake Tapper, who is no friend of this administration, congratulating Twitter on the making the Streisand effect work. In fact, you even have more of it today. Glenn Reynolds of Instapundit has a weekly op-ed in USA Today, and it was going to be on the Twitter censorship, and it was censored. They wouldn't run it, so he ran it on his blog, and the censorship gave this story legs. And frankly, this is one of the things where the media has shot itself in the foot. If they had treated Donald Trump as a normal president and opposed him in a normal way, then if they held back the story, they might have had more credibility. But because they've played, you were talking about Russia earlier, because they kept playing all this stuff, trying to play a particular card, they threw away their credibility. It's almost like what you were talking about with your previous guest on Sweden, which was excellent guest, by the way. I really enjoyed that interview. If you're just turning in to listen to me, go back and listen to this podcast and listen to the interview with the gentleman from the American School in Sweden. Great radio. You're talking about how the media
Thank you. No, just very briefly, thank you. That was Dr. Michael Neverdakis for those listening. And I agree, absolutely. Great guest. We want to get him back on that topic and others soon. But anyway, Pete.
Oh, wonderful stuff. But he talked about how the media reporting out of Sweden was not compatible with what he's seeing on the ground. And as you may not know, I was doing a lot of on-the-ground reporting myself for a while, and that's what I've seen. And this is where, if the media still had the credibility that it had, years ago, they could have actually killed this story effectively, but they've amplified it, and they've allowed and because of that allows the president to amplify it. That's what's really painful here for the left and for the.
I think there's something else about the story also. It's not just the media censorship; it's also their outright attempt to kill the story. I mean, they're arguing for this as if they were on the Biden campaign. I mean, if you look at the people who bring this story up in regards to talking about it, they're trying to kill it, and they would have people on who are talking about it as if they were an appendage of the Biden campaign, despite being part of the media itself. It's very bizarre. Even though Joe Biden is in like witness protection and having any real commentary about this other than, my schedule or whatever not. It seems the media is taking the main role in the denunciations.
Yeah, running away for 3 days wasn't a good idea. And again, if the media had not done what they had done, if he had been asked about it, he could have just said, "This is old news. I know my son has problems, but they got no business going after my son." Something he could have played that kind of card, but because again, the media censorship in their zeal to protect Joe Biden, why he would need so much protection if he supposedly has this huge lead, one might wonder. But this is where they're setting themselves up. And frankly, this reminds me, I've been tweeting out a lot of my old Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein stories from the last couple of years. You might have noticed that in my Twitter feed, and people are wondering, why is he tweeting that out? Because I'm going to be talking on my podcast on Friday and doing a piece on how this story is pretty much the Jeffrey Epstein story and the Harvey Weinstein story, not just in the question of whether or not women were being provided for Hunter Biden, but the idea that the thing about the Harvey Weinstein story and the Jeffrey Epstein story is everybody connected knew what was going on, but it wasn't a scandal until the average person found out what was going on. With the Hunter Biden stuff, it's pretty much similar. People knew that this stuff was going on. This is, in fact, to some degree, this is the norm. And it was not a scandal until the general public knew. And that's really the connection here. The fact that I think this is why you see many deep state operators who just went nuts on this, or the Never Trump is going nuts on this, because this administration threatens that I'm going to get my kickback. I'm going to get my dumb son or crazy nephew who's useless this job, and he's going to get money, and I'm going to get money, and it's all going to work out. It's sort of like the old line from Scripture where you did this thing in private, but I'm going to do this in full view with the sun shining down. All of these, the media censorship is the story, and it's preserved this story. And I got to tell you this, I regret that I'm going to be working second shift at the debate, because I would love to see how this is going to be played.
Yeah, I can't help but think that's where this is going to come out too. And I wonder how Trump's going to do at it. I think that's going to be key here. If he gets people's attention, I mean, with the mics being muted, Joe Biden unable to interrupt during the 2-minute long period, we'll see if the moderator steps in. I'm sure that they'll be trying to steer it away from that, but we'll see. Anyway, Pete, we got about a minute left. Where do you think that's going to go, and how do you think Trump's going to handle it in about a minute?
I think Trump is going to hit it several times. I think Biden has 3 days to come up with a line to counter it. But the thing is, people understand censorship. That's what Trump is going to play. Trump is going to play this a little bit against Biden, but a lot against the media. The media is telling you what to read and think. And that's really the card that's going to change people. That the average voter who doesn't care about other things cares about that.
I think that would be the most effective message. I think you're right. That's a great point. If they hear him hitting Biden on it, that's just same old politics in some sense. I mean, granted, people are used to Trump hitting the media, but if people start to feel like they're being deceived, if people start to look into it for themselves, and this stuff is pretty easy to look into, I think that's when the scales start to shift a little bit. Pete, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, and you guys have a great rest of the week. And if you don't mind me plugging, the podcast this week should be at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Occasionally, when they have me in on overtime, I do it at 11 a.m., but till 3 p.m. Friday, I'll be talking about this more.
And great. That'll be on the Tech Guy blog, right?
The Tech Guy. There'll be a link on the Tech Guy blog, and of course, it streams at my YouTube channel, the Tech Guy blog channel.
Sounds good. All right, sounds good. Again, this is Peter, the Tech Guy in Jemmy. You should go check his website out, thetechguyblog.com. Also check out his YouTube channel, like he's talking about. He has a podcast coming up later this week, the Tech Guy blog on YouTube. Pete, thanks again for joining us. We will be back in just a minute with Dr. Linwood Tauheed. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We're going to be talking about post-COVID economic arrangements, what that looks like, how the economy is going to adapt, how it will be forced to adapt. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Again, Fault Lines. Be right back.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live from the capital of the United States, Washington, D.C. Joining us is Dr. Linwood Tauheed, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Dr. Tauheed, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir.
So let's get into some COVID economics, meaning basically how COVID has changed our economic system. One thing, just as a foundational question, can you explain the numbers and how we should process the numbers that come out? So one day you would get the unemployment numbers. These are the people, these are the new unemployment numbers for the week. These are the people who needed a job, who lost their job, who needed employment benefits, etc. And then you have another number where they would say, these are the people who found jobs. Now, are we supposed to just subtract the two numbers? How are we supposed to process these two metrics in the context of how our system is proceeding?
Okay. In that context, you do at least fundamentally need another number, which is the increase of persons coming into the labor force, that is, new workers. And the labor force has a cutoff age at 16. If you're younger than 16, you're not in the labor force. But when persons become 16, they become part of the labor force, and they will need jobs. So we're talking about, for example, teenagers. Teenagers coming into the workforce who are looking for jobs. That number needs to be accounted for when we analyze the new jobs versus old jobs. Because the population is growing, there's always going to be a need to expand the labor force. And so persons who are losing jobs are obviously persons who have already had jobs. Persons who are gaining jobs are fulfilling or supplying to the demand that's out there. But there's an additional supply that's coming along, which is persons just entering the labor force because they're just getting old enough. And so even if, let's say, there's full employment, meaning everyone who has a job, wants a job, has a job, as the population increases every month, we record it every month, it increases, hourly by hourly. Those persons are needing jobs. And if the number of jobs, the supply of jobs is not increasing, those persons will be unemployed, or younger people may come into the labor force and displace others who are already working because they're willing to work for lower wages. So even in a equilibrium position, in which there really is not one, we need additional jobs just to keep up with the expansion of the labor force.
So with those additional jobs that we need to keep up with the labor force, it seems that we're having a substantial change in regards to our economics. And a lot of that has to do with retail. For example, my wife has not been shopping for a very long time, despite the fact that she used to, live at the supermarkets. And I would imagine she's not alone in that. What are going to be the substantial changes we're going to see in our economy? And I would imagine, would this be a trend towards automation now? Considering, they're going to find or try to find cheaper ways in order to get products to people. And automation is typically one of the ways they do it. But I guess what I'm asking is, what are the ways that our society, our economy, are going to change in lieu of COVID-19?
Well, you bring up automation. I think is very important to consider that. Companies attempt to automate all the time. I mean, bringing in robots or other automated processes for producing goods and services is something that companies want to do because it increases their profit margins. A robot is in the long term going to be less expensive than an employee. And so whenever a large corporation, which will have the money to automate, whenever they see an opportunity to do so, they will do so. And if that means laying off workers in an economic downturn, in a recession, that's an opportunity, because what it means is they can automate and not hire those workers back, as opposed to just laying off workers and, just in good economic times. And so bad economic times usually ends up with fewer persons employed, re-employed when times get better, because many of their jobs have been automated or eliminated. And downsizing is what we call that, elimination of those jobs, when you're laying off current employees, a portion of your current workforce, and requiring that the continuing workforce just works harder at the same wage or hourly rate. And so that downturns like this recession gives an opportunity for large corporations to automate. And so, yes, there will be more of that. There will be increased automation coming out of this process. And so those workers who had jobs who were laid off, many of them will not go back to work. And let me say
interesting.
Something about
that is counterintuitive. I just want to jump in here real quick. Dr. Tauheed, thank you for being with us.
Sure.
What's counterintuitive for me is that I would think that it's when everybody's employed, when the value of labor is high, when, the cost of hiring somebody is basically being driven up because there's a scarcity of people available to be hired. It's at that point when you'd have the incentive to automate. Why is that not the case? You might have just explained this, but taking that sort of counterintuitive, taking that into effect, how is that not the case? How do you see that playing out during times like this?
Well, there's a paradox in economic thinking, and when I say that economic thinking, I'm thinking of how businesses think about what they need, as opposed to how we might capture data on the larger, what we call the macro economy. Every business is, well, maybe not every business, but generally businesses are in the process of wanting to increase their profit margins, and if they do so and can do so. And automation is a way to do that. It increases productivity. So if the demand for your product doesn't go up, but the cost of your supply of that product, the cost of producing that product goes down because of automation, then your profit margin goes up. So every business or most businesses have that logic in mind. The problem is, of course, when you lay off your workers, you're also laying off your future customers. And but businesses don't have those long-term long-term thinking. They're thinking about short-term gains, and there may be long-term consequences that will come back around to them. But they're not thinking in a macro sense. They're thinking in a micro sense. They're thinking of their business and how to increase the profitability for that business. And that is a problem that we have. This is called the fallacy of composition. We can't make the assumption that's what's good for a business. Any business is good for all businesses or for the economy as a whole. It generally may not be that case.
And so just real quick there, I mean, the fallacy of composition that you're describing about, that would probably be a big disjuncture between microeconomics, the study of, individual choices or the choices that organizations make, and macroeconomics, the study of the larger composition of the economy. If you can't get from one to the other, if it's difficult to sort of aggregate all of the choices that people are making on the small scale, and you're having a hard time figuring out how to tell a larger story about the economy, is that sort of the side effect or one of the side effects of that fallacy?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is the fallacy in action that you can't aggregate to the macro from things that are happening at the micro. Although mainstream economics still attempts to argue that you can. In fact, the fact that we cannot do that was made clear by John Maynard Keynes in the mid-30s during the Great Depression. He pointed out what's called the fallacy of thrift. If each of us save, we're each better off. But if all of us save, the economy is worse off because spending goes down. So that process of that disjuncture between the macro and micro is something that has to be recognized when we're predicting macro effects from micro behavior.
Retail. Interesting. What does it mean that retail has basically bit the bullet? I think somewhere I read, I think it was like 30 or 40% of the businesses weren't coming back. That seems to be significant. What effect is that going to have going forward? I mean, like just on people themselves in regards to the way they get their products and the way they have changed, meaning their buying behaviors, all of those things. That seems to be sudden and drastic, and there seems to be consequences that will extend beyond just these few months.
Oh, you're right. I mean, we're seeing a consolidation in various industries where small businesses are going out of business because they're declaring bankruptcy. They don't have the customer base to keep going like they were. They can't afford to borrow money to tide them over. They would be high risk anyway, and so many businesses are shutting down. I think the figure is estimated like 40% of small businesses are probably not going to be able to make it through this process. Now, small businesses in the aggregate provide the majority of jobs in this country. But when the economy, let's say, begins to recover, whenever that is, it's not doing that now. But when it does, and people who are working have money, they'll want to spend it, and large corporations are filling the gap that was fulfilled by those small businesses. Now that creates a consolidation, an increase in monopoly power among large businesses. And what we do understand is that monopolies tend to have higher prices for their products, and than say smaller businesses that have to compete against each other. And so we may see a decrease in prices now because businesses want to attract customers and increase their market share. But once market share becomes consolidated in only a few businesses, then we will see increase in prices, because that's one way for monopolies and oligopolies to increase their profitability.
And by the way, we're seeing that with trillions given to billionaires. I mean, like Jeff Bezos, for example, or for the Waltons, these guys that have been able to switch their companies over to compensate and take advantage of the retail, they've seen their profits skyrocket. I mean, to the tune of like over $1 trillion, if I'm not mistaken. But this is Dr. Linwood Taid, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan, and we will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
This is Radio Sputnik.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and our guest, Dr. Linwood Taid. He's an associate professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Dr. Taid, thank you again for being with us. I wanted to turn to something slightly more practical and immediate. I wanted to go to the government, but first, let's just talk about this from the level of somebody who's stuck at home. They're living in lockdown. Maybe they got laid off. Maybe they're having a hard time finding work. Maybe their hours have been dropped, and so they're not making as much money. And then they're facing what appears to be a pending and mounting economic crisis that we're kind of, in midstream right now. From your perspective, I mean, it's a little bit of a, not asking for practical advice here, not necessarily a scholarly opinion on where our country is going or should be going or how the government should turn its handles. But from the perspective of somebody who's sitting at home, what kinds of choices, what kinds of perspectives would you recommend that they take and make, Dr. Taid?
Well, I think as in any great economic situation, the federal government has a tremendous responsibility to help people through it so that they're not permanently damaged. The relief bill that came and went, we showed an increase in productive and economic activity as a result of that. Those bills are now stalled in the Senate and House. Well, the House has passed one, but the Senate, I guess they're voting today. But I don't see prospects for any bill to be passed by both chambers and then signed by the president. So we're going to head into another dip, or maybe another cliff. We're going to fall over another cliff as the recession comes back. And so we were at 3.2% unemployment in March before the coronavirus began to have its economic effects. We're now at 7.9%, more than twice, actually about 2.5 times that. And so we're starting our next recession from that 8% level. We went up to nearly 20% unemployment before, so we will certainly go over that 20% unemployment rate. And so we are very much in Great Depression territory. The official unemployment rate was up to 25% in 1933, but it took 3 years from 1929 to 33, in 29 to 33, to get to a 25% unemployment rate. We will hit that in a couple of months if there's not another relief bill. And so people who are sitting at home, particularly those who don't have income, are looking at dire straits. And one of the things they're looking at is evictions and foreclosures. And so there's an estimated about 40 million people that are predicted to become homeless when the foreclosure crisis, the foreclosure documents began to go through the court after the moratorium was lifted in January. And so people.
Dr. Tahi, that's a good overview. But I was really trying to. Here's what I'm thinking. I'm just imagining for our audience, a lot of people are probably in this position. They're probably either stuck at home, or their hours have been reduced, or they're not making quite as much money as they have before. I know some people are actually making about as much or more, but that's definitely not the case for most people. Really, here's what I was trying to get at. For the average person, if you're listening to this and you're like, what should I be doing? Not what should the government be doing, but what should I, as a person, for myself, for my family, what should I be doing? Do you have any recommendations or advice?
Well, I think the recommendation is outside of economics. It's actually a political recommendation that people have to become politically active and with their representatives, particularly their federally elected representatives, and lobby them, pressure them to get a relief bill out and signed. I know that there's more of that going on in blue states, and blue state representatives tend to be wanting a relief bill. Red state representatives are not necessarily following along, but persons without jobs live in red states too, and they need to become politically active. Call their state senators, call their congresspersons, and demand that they get a relief bill out as soon as possible, and I mean certainly before the election. And they have to become politically active.
I don't think that bill is going to come out before the election. I think people are just going to suffer, and the political instrument is going to hold those people on the vine while they suffer up to the election. And I think the most appalling part of this is that the people who are doing this, who have this kind of philosophical responsibility to ensure the material welfare, meaning any notion of a social safety net, any notion of people putting their energies and their taxes into our system, when times get rough, there's an expectation that the political instrument is going to ensure that those people are made whole, and that have failed miserably. Both parties, by the way. So there's not going to be, at least I don't think, maybe there is, but any kind of stimulus before the election. Going forward, though, can you talk about how, I want to say famine, but how depravity shows itself in generations going forward? Like, for example, the thing that I'm remembering are civilizations in the past that went through and experienced famine. And you could see the experiences of famine and desperation within the generations, and with even in the gene structure going forward in families like, 1 or 2 generations later.
Mm-hmm. Well, mothers who are carrying children in times of famine give birth to children who are going to have more illnesses, who are going to be have less, I guess, cognitive ability because their brains have been starved when they needed nourishment. Those effects go on for their generation and the next generation as well. There's also a kind of a social connection that's more of a biological. There's a social connection. For example, we was talking about foreclosures. Most people have their wealth in their homes. And so if you have a situation in which your house is foreclosed on because you can't pay your mortgage, in many cases that equity goes away because the value of your home has decreased. That equity goes away. Now, people use that equity in their homes for many things, such as putting their children through college. And so if your equity in your home, your life savings essentially goes away, then you're not able to do that with your children. And so your children can't get the education that they would have gotten beforehand. And of course, that's going to affect their ability to earn an income through the future. So there are these intergenerational effects. We certainly saw that in the 2008 recession, where a great deal of income, of wealth that was in home mortgages was wiped out. It was particularly egregious in the African American and Latinx communities where those communities were heavily hit by foreclosures and therefore were heavily had a heavily a greater loss of wealth as a result of that crisis, and that's going to happen again.
I'm really, I don't mean to push on it too much, but I still am really curious. Like, for a lot of, and again, I don't want to beat a dead horse here. I agree political solutions are necessary. In fact, I agree that people's time would be well spent working nationally, but even more importantly, in my opinion, locally, like building up local networks of support. If you have excess food, for instance, or even excess money, if you have room in your house and there's the possibility that people around you are soon going to be homeless, put some space up for them like that. Like, I think there are all of these opportunities there. But economically, I mean, I guess my take is I kind of wonder what people should be doing. Should they be looking for jobs online? If they're in an industry that seems like it's on the way out the door, should they be looking to move into another industry? I don't want to push too hard here because you've already sort of said your piece on it, Dr. Tauhid. But is there anything like that you think that we might not, or the audience might not be aware of, or any perspectives you think it might be valid for them to hear if they're literally worried about a sort of life and death situation and they're trying to, save themselves, save people they love? Dr. Tauhid.
Well, I mean, I guess pushing it. Let's push into some radical solutions. One of the things that one of the tactics that emerged during the Great Depression that has emerged in other countries when they've been in economic situations is creating what are called local currencies. That is not waiting for the federal government to push money into the economy. I think that you lobby for that because the government can do that. But local economies have emerged in which people are essentially buying and selling from each other. And so you have, for example, we have farmers that have seen a decrease in the demand for their products because people don't have the same money to spend. Well, farmers don't want to grow crops and just plow them back into the ground. So it may be possible, for example, for communities to have partnerships with farms or create farming co-ops in which people can begin to grow food to distribute or in their local communities for free. I guess that would be charity or for little income. These kind of things, in fact, were advised by the royal family in England that people set up. I forget the term, but people set up gardens and community gardens and help people through.
Victory gardens, is that the kind of thing you're talking about, or Liberty Gardens?
Well, Liberty Gardens, but I'm thinking in modern times, this was something that I guess Prince Charles advised that people should be doing now. So we're not talking World War II. We're talking now that those kind of gardens. So those things are being advised that people will do that. In other words, communities have to become more cohesive in which we're going to help each other more. But I still get back to, if we're going to organize communities in those ways, then we have to put pressure on the federal government to do its part. Because there still is, even in community organizing, there's not enough there's just not enough finance in those situations to get back to anywhere near normal. The state and local governments that can't create their own currency, the federal government can create currency, and we know that because they created the $2.2 trillion and pushed that into the economy overnight, with no inflation. And so we can continue to do that because that's what the federal does. That's the power of being able to create your own currency. So yes, you have to do things in your community that are more community-minded and on a small level.
30.
But we still need to pressure the federal government to do its part by injecting money into the economy. We have to do everything.
Dr. Tauhid, thank you for joining us.
Welcome.
For those listening, that was the voice of Dr. Linwood Tauhid, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We will be back in 1 minute with headlines.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the Untold.
Fault lines.
And we're back live from across the divided states of America. It is time for our last hour this morning, the last hour of the most disruptive show, straddling the divides of those divided states. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall, with my co-host, of course, Shane Stranahan, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And in the news, as we do 3 times most mornings, we're giving you headlines, once at 7, once at 8, and once at 9 a.m. Eastern. That's 4, 5, and 6 a.m. Pacific. First up, the Commission on Presidential Debate says it is revising its rules for the debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump taking place this Thursday in Tennessee. They'll be changing the rules for this debate so that the candidates have 2 minutes of uninterrupted time at the beginning of each 15-minute response segment. And during that time, each candidate will only have his mic on for the time he's allotted to speak. Trump's re-election campaign released a statement last night agreeing to the change while accusing the commission of bias. This, of course, follows the nasty mess, the dumpster fire on a freight train headed off a cliff that was the first presidential debate a couple of weeks ago. During a campaign rally in Prescott, Arizona, Donald Trump slammed Joe Biden in the upcoming November presidential elections as corrupt. He was reproaching Biden's son, Hunter Biden, as having the, quote, laptop from hell, end quote. Andre, we have the audio from this. Let's play this clip for the audience.
Joe Biden is always and has been a corrupt politician. And as far as I'm concerned, the Biden family is a criminal enterprise. If you read this laptop, I tell you what, this is called the laptop from hell. The only laptop that was almost as good, maybe worse, was the laptop of Anthony Weiner. You remember that? Ding, 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 ding.
And yeah, I mean, this is where people's mind go, especially with like, apparently Hunter Biden had porn and stuff on there and like pics of himself and that kind of thing. So, that's the natural association to make. And I think it's a bit of bonus points for Trump politically to do so. But, there's so many points getting thrown around. It's only really being broadcast to his audience at this point. Now, of course, we're curious. Will this story get wider attention during the debates? We had a conversation with Pete and Jemmy about that earlier. I thought he made a good salient point, which is if Trump goes after the media, if he doesn't make it about Biden so much as he makes it about media malfeasance, the media ignoring the story, and social media companies, Twitter and Facebook specifically, suppressing this story, as they've done with Twitter literally blocking 6 tweets from the New York Post about this story. If Trump makes it about the media, I think he might actually swing some folks. I think some people in the audience will be like, wait, what? What have I not been hearing about? What's been hidden from me? And if they start to look into it, there might be something there. What's your take, Jamarl?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's better to make it about the media or make it, like, is it more bang for your buck to make it about censorship? Like, let's say in the debates. Like, right now, he's making this argument to his audience. The media is bringing this up in the negative, meaning they're trying to downplay the story, meaning, in a weird way, Peter, the Jimmy is right, that they basically made this a story by trying to not make this a story. It's so utterly bizarre. Now, the catch becomes, how does Trump play it in order to get the most attention to it and get most, the people where they look into it? That's going to be at the debates. And the catch becomes, is that going to be about Biden or is that going to be about Biden's kid? I don't think attacking Biden's kid gets it. He needs to somehow make the connection of corruption. But I still don't think that's enough. I mean, even if everybody said, yes, we believe everything that you're telling us, would that be enough for Trump to get over the finish line? I don't think it does, but I could be wrong on it. But I think he needs to make the connection in corruption.
I think you would. I mean, again, what we're talking about here is the marginal number of voters who can be swung at this point, and who knows how many there really are, and who knows if they're going to go actually and vote. If they don't really, if they haven't been engaged, if they're not that kind of person, they might not be in. This also comes, though, we're talking about the Hunter Biden laptop story coming out from the New York Post. Adam Schiff on Friday called this Russian disinformation. Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe yesterday said, quote, I'm going to quote here, we have a clip for it, but the quote is, the intelligence community doesn't believe that because there is no intelligence that supports that, end quote. But again, we have a clip for this too. This is DNI John Ratcliffe on Fox News.
Tell us what's real and what's fake. Is this Russian disinformation, Director?
So, Maria, it's funny that some of the people that complain the most about intelligence being politicized are the ones politicizing intelligence. And unfortunately, in this case, it is Adam Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who, as you pointed out on Friday, said that the intelligence community believes that Hunter Biden's laptop and the emails on it are part of some Russian disinformation campaign. Let me be clear. The intelligence community doesn't believe that because there's no intelligence that supports that. And we have shared no intelligence with Chairman Schiff or any other member of Congress that Hunter Biden's laptop is part of some Russian disinformation campaign. It's simply not true. And this is exactly what I said I would stop when I became the director of national intelligence. And that's people using the intelligence community to leverage some political narrative. And in this case, apparently Chairman Schiff wants anything against his preferred political candidate to be deemed as not real and is using the intelligence community or attempting to use the intelligence community to say there's nothing to see here. Don't drag the intelligence community into this. Hunter Biden's laptop is not part of some Russian disinformation campaign, and I think it's clear that the American people know that.
That is so gratifying, Jamarl. That him describing people, leveraging intelligence to serve some political end, to get political gain. That describes years. That describes the last half decade, basically, of national intelligence, the political handling of national intelligence, releases, anonymous sourcing, all this stuff. It's weird that, this is what happens, I guess. You elevate these agencies, you elevate the intelligence agencies, you give them more merit in some sense in the eyes of the public, and then you cash in on that. You cash out basically by referencing anonymous sources and relying on what they say, even though what they're saying isn't technically true. It's so satisfying to hear him describe what's been going on.
Yeah,
anyway,
I agree with
you. You got headlines to do.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he's basically cutting through the quick of it, and it's basically Adam Schiff is lying. And it's does it in a very clear way, like there's no hedge, and does so in a way where you believe him. like it's not you're like, yeah, it sounds like Schiff is lying. Just listening to the comment, Schiff's lying.
Absolutely. All right, next headline here. President Trump slammed White House coronavirus task force leader Anthony Fauci in a campaign call. He called Fauci a, quote, disaster, end quote. This comes a day after Fauci said he predicted Trump would get COVID while he was watching Trump's public appearance. I believe this was his Rose Garden appearance a couple of weeks before, in which Trump was surrounded by people in which, few of whom were wearing masks, basically. So Trump speaking before an audience, few people wearing masks. Fauci's watching this thinking, yeah, it's a risky situation to be in, definitely. And it definitely is. But I don't know, the fact that he said those comments publicly. Anyway, we can go back and forth on this. But next headline. The National Guard sent up 4 spy planes to monitor protests in major cities, with 3 of the reconnaissance planes overhead to watch protests over the death of George Floyd in 3 major cities in Minneapolis, Phoenix, and Washington, D.C. That 4th spy plane, that 4th recon plane, was sent up over El Dorado Hills, not a major city, but an affluent suburb of Sacramento, California, had no record of violent protests. There were some peaceful protests, but most notably, that suburb is the home to the head of the California National Guard. That's Major General David S. Baldwin. This story broke through the LA Times, Los Angeles Times, and basically disgruntled members of the National Guard were left wondering, like, why are we working this? What's the point here? And it seems from what they're saying, the implication here is basically Major General David S. Baldwin, head of the National Guard, head of California's National Guard, just wanting that extra special personal protection. That seems to be the implication. There might have been something else going on. You want to give him the benefit of the doubt. We're only hearing this one side of it. But that does seem to be what this story is telling us, at least. Anyway, next headline here. I'm going to jump to this one, actually. You added this one in there, thankfully. CNN's chief legal analyst and renowned reporter for The New Yorker, Jeffrey Toobin, was abruptly suspended yesterday from his position at The New Yorker after he started masturbating during a live Zoom call between members of The New Yorker and WNYC Radio last week. Toobin says, quote, "I made an embarrassingly stupid mistake believing I was off camera. I apologize to my wife, family, friends, and co-workers. I believed I was not visible on Zoom. I thought no one on the Zoom call could see me. I thought I had muted the Zoom video," end quote.
That makes
not
it
a
okay,
good
Shane.
image and not a good look for this dude.
That
not
makes
a
it
good,
okay, Shane. He thought he was off Zoom. He thought the camera was off. That makes it okay. I thought that was the funniest part of the story. It's like, my bad. I really apologize. And it's like, so wait, you apologize for pulling it out? No. That part, full intention to pull it out and masturbate. I apologize that I didn't cut the camera off so you couldn't see me masturbate while you guys were doing the meeting. It's like, whoa.
Oh, God.
That's rough, man.
That's, yeah.
He said he apologized to his wife.
This was rough.
Family. Like I said yesterday, I think you should basically take the response of, you should be pleased that you had the opportunity to see me gratify myself in this way. I don't know. I mean, otherwise, you're just kind of stuck with this. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm embarrassed by this. Don't be embarrassed, Jeffrey. Own it. Like, I'm a man. I have needs. And just go from there.
Yeah, man. You gotta take the reins in your hands,
right,
so to speak.
Right.
Anyway, moving into foreign policy headlines. Well, we still got a couple of minutes here. President Trump has agreed to remove Sudan from the state sponsors of terror list after the country agreed to pay $335 million to U.S. terror victims and families. The payment relates to al-Qaeda's 1998 bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, attacks conducted by Osama bin Laden's al-Qaeda network while bin Laden was living in Sudan. More than 500 of the 700 victims of those 1998 bombings signed a letter rejecting Sudan's settlement offer, partly because it would award more money to Americans than to Africans who worked at the embassies and nearby. Also, this morning, the first ever delegation from Israel to the United Arab Emirates is beginning. They've gone there and meetings have begun. During the meeting, the countries announced that along with the USA, they will set up a joint $3 billion investment fund headquartered in Jerusalem. This comes as part of efforts to normalize relations, and they'll apparently be using that fund to promote regional economic development. Said it during the 7 o'clock headlines, and I'll say it again now. I support, diplomatic armistices, détentes, that kind of thing. But I wish that the U.S. and Israel, the two, big countries that I kind of have some serious qualms about here, I wish they would stop the bloodshed stuff that they're doing. I wish that they would sort of face up to their political sins and do that instead of trying to, shore up their role in the international order. Anyway, we've got a few more headlines to get through. I'm going to get through them real quick. The Russian Foreign Ministry today said that the country is willing to sign a 1-year extension of its longstanding nuclear arms reduction treaty, New START. This follows similar comments by President Vladimir Putin. To quote the foreign ministry here, quote, "Russia is suggesting that the New START be extended by 1 year and is ready to undertake the political commitment alongside the United States for both sides to freeze the existing number of nuclear warheads during that period. This may be implemented if and only if it is understood that the freeze on the warheads will not be followed by any additional demands on part of the United States," end quote. Next headline, related news, got to get through them here before we have to go into our break. After the 13-year ban on arms sales to Iran imposed by the United Nations Security Council came to an end on Sunday, United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo warned individuals or entities not to sell Iran armaments. Spokesperson for Iran's foreign ministry remarked on that, saying that, quote, Pompeo's remarks are the most important sign that not even he believes unilateral U.S. sanctions have been successful and no UN sanctions have been reinstated, end quote. The U.S., by the way, unilaterally withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. That's the JCPOA, or the Iran deal, as it's sometimes called. That came in May 2018. In the process, they imposed waves of harsh economic sanctions on Iran. They've done that since then, at least. The latest of those sanctions came in early October when 18 Iranian banks were blacklisted, including those that process humanitarian trade transactions. This effectively severed Iran's financial sector from the global economy. And you know what? I'm going to wrap it there. Those are headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're going into a break. We're going to be back on the other side of this break, talking, I'm sure, about those last two stories, talking about the New START Treaty and more with Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. Back with him in a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now, the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in DC. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us at 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming us on, give us a like and share that content. You can also give us a call. We'll be taking calls in 30 minutes, 15 minutes to 30 minutes or so. You can reach us at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. That is in addition to chats and tweets. But joining us right now is former UN weapons inspector and WMD whistleblower Scott Ritter. Scott, welcome to the show.
Yep, thanks for having me.
So I've been paying attention to many of the conflicts that have been going on around the world. I've made the argument that there is no such thing as international law. If you have selective justice, then that's not really justice. That's basically dominant countries having their say, and the smaller countries just having to kind of deal with the consequences. From the standpoint of this kind of neoconservative argument, and I mean this in the sense of Democrats and Republicans, because both at this point seem to agree on this aspect of interventional politics, maybe with the exception of Trump. But their argument is basically, if we don't have control, and if we don't have, let's say, control of the reins, that the world basically falls apart. And so the interventions, the toppling governments, all of these things are justified by the U.S. maintaining this geopolitical control. Whether it's Syria, whether it's Yemen, whether it's Afghanistan. Every time Trump has tried to pull out of Afghanistan or pull out of Syria, you had this huge feedback from Democrats, intelligence, etc., media, the works, basically trying to force him to keep those troops there. Is it true, and is that argument true? If the United States pull back out of those countries, will countries that we consider our enemies intervene, and meaning expand into the void? And more importantly, should we care if they expand into the void if it's in their region of the world?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's take a look at. We'll pick two examples: Iraq, Afghanistan. We intervene in Afghanistan because we claim that the Taliban, this Islamic fundamentalist, throwback government, had provided a safe space for Al Qaeda, in which they planned an attack against the United States, and that we needed to go into Afghanistan to eliminate Al Qaeda, and because the Taliban refused to recant, we needed to eliminate them so as to preserve Afghanistan as a bastion of stability in which this kind of activities could never take place again. First of all, false predicate. The planning for the attack on America took place in Hamburg, Germany. So if we really wanted to go in and root out the source of the attack, we should have invaded and occupied Hamburg, Germany. I have no problem with going in Afghanistan and taking out Al Qaeda. But look, we took out the Taliban. We occupied Afghanistan. Anybody who says that we've done good in Afghanistan is higher than a kite. We've killed hundreds of thousands of innocent people. We've destroyed a country that was already destroyed. And the end result is the Taliban's back stronger than ever, and they're going to regain control. Once we leave. Did we do any good in going into Afghanistan? None whatsoever. Did we do bad? Absolutely. Everything we touched in Afghanistan only got worse. Iraq, we have Saddam Hussein. We claim that he is, the personification of evil. But Saddam Hussein was actually one of the premier forces of stability in the Middle East. It might not be Jeffersonian democracy type stability, but it's stability that took an artificial country, because that's what Iraq was when it was created, basically a bunch of white Europeans drawing lines on a map, forcing Shia, Sunni, Kurds together in this artifice, governed out of Baghdad by a Saudi Sunni king, a Hashemite, who was plucked in there. Iraq had been revolting against this from the start, and Saddam Hussein's ascension to power more or less was a bid by the political, the politically stable Sunni elite to create an Iraq reality out of this artificial entity that was created. Saddam Hussein's goal was to somehow get the Kurds, the Shia, and the Sunni to live together, united in a Iraqi vision. Again, I'm not sitting here saying that what he was doing was perfect, but it was creating stability in the Middle East. We pluck him out, we go in there, and what we have in Iraq is the antithesis of stability. It's one of the most unstable, countries in the region. There is no peace, and from the vacuum that was created when we removed Saddam Hussein, grew Al Qaeda in Iraq, which morphed into ISIS, which is still there today. A spinoff of the instability that comes when the America intervenes. And I could go on and on and on. Everything we touch breaks. We have the opposite of the Midas touch. Americans like to think when we touch it, it becomes gold and it becomes wonderful. No. When we touch it, it breaks. So the notion that America has to intervene to promote global stability is false from the very start. Whenever America intervenes, especially militarily, to try and impose its will on a sovereign people, it only gets worse. And from that, by making it worse, we make it easier for nations that may not share our goals and visions to move into the vacuum and take over. This is what's happened in the Middle East with Iran. When Saddam Hussein was in power, there was no way in hell Iran was moving into Iraq. When the Taliban was in power, there was no way Iran was moving into Afghanistan. thanks to our interventions, Iran now has a heavy presence in both. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying that if the premise of, if you're one of these neoconservative types or neoliberals, they're guilty of the same thing, who believe that American intervention is necessary to prevent the expansion of our so-called enemies in the region, it does the exact opposite, because we inevitably fail, and through our failure, we empower our enemies. That's just a statement of fact. You can trace every intervention we've made in the past 30 years, and that is the result.
Scott, this is Shane here. Thank you for joining us. I'm gonna jump in real briefly. There's actually a breaking news update here. The U.S. Justice Department, this is according to Reuters, is expected to file an antitrust lawsuit against Alphabet Inc.'s Google today for allegedly breaking the law and using its market power to fend off rivals. This comes according to a source familiar with the planning. That's just a brief interjection there. That will probably have wider repercussions in the long run, though. And, it might serve as a precedent, or might serve as a sort of first domino in terms of other antitrust lawsuits coming against the other big tech companies, too. In any event, back to the topic at hand. Scott, I think you're right. Another side of this is that it's a quagmire that we get stuck in. These wars, including Afghanistan, decades at this point. We're stuck there. We can't seem to get out. Do you think, the whole justification here on the public's end has been ideology, has been trying to support democracy abroad, quote unquote, trying to promote freedoms abroad, apparently by oppressing local political leaders, that whole show. With Trump, though, and with generally the sort of post-Iraq war sentiment, I would argue that there is an underlying anti-war sentiment echoed by the American people, despite politicians' attacks on both Russia and China, whether you're on the left or on the right, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. Really now, Jamarl and I were talking earlier, they're kind of converging. Both parties seem to dislike both Russia and China. Despite that fact, it seems like the public isn't that into it. Do you think that mood is going to shift whether or not the United States is likely to get into more wars, or do you think the material and economic military realities are going to do more in terms of keeping us back? Or on the contrary, do you think we're just going to keep going? Do you think we're going to keep trying to invade and overthrow countries when it fits our interests? Scott, what's your take?
Well, first of all, as somebody who has taken an anti-war stance myself for nearly 2 decades, I would contest the notion that the American public has become anti-war. We've become anti-losing wars. We don't like wars that we don't win. And so there is a frustration about Afghanistan. There's a frustration about Iraq. But we continue to fund our military in the tune of $760 billion. If we went, I can tell you right now that America would rally behind any military intervention that was in and out. If we went in there, blew the crap out of a place, achieved whatever objective we declared was why we were doing it, and then we got out, we'd have people marching in the streets. We'd have more flags that can be produced flying from the houses, because America is an inherently warlike nation. That's just a reality. We continue to believe we are a force of good. We continue to believe that somehow we are the shining city on the hill, the example for the war. We believe in American exceptionalism, that the rules apply to everybody but us because we are a force of good. And so long as we collectively have this mindset, and again, we can peel off, people who say, I don't believe that, I don't believe, fine. There's always outliers. But collectively as a nation, that tends to be the sentiment that holds us together. And as long as we believe we are exceptional, that the rules don't apply to us, that we are the natural leaders of the world, then we will always be positioned to intervene. We will always believe that America is capable of intervening and doing good. We only become anti-war when we intervene and fail. Afghanistan, it's impossible for somebody to articulate, a justification for continued presence in Afghanistan that isn't laughed out of the room. The same with Iraq. Why are we there? But take a look at what's happening. Trump is talking about getting out of Afghanistan, talking about getting out of Iraq, talking about getting out of Syria even. But does that mean we're getting out of the Middle East? No, at the same time he's doing this, he's introducing a new phenomenon in the Middle East, which is normalization of relations with Israel, which creates this new buffer of pro-American, pro-Israeli Gulf Arab states to do the same mission of imposing America's will on a region. We may be getting out of Afghanistan, Iraq, hopefully Syria, but we're not getting out of the Middle East. We're going to be pulling 7,000 troops out of the region, but we're repositioning them in bases that already contain tens of thousands of Americans in the United Arab Emirates, in Qatar, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere. You know, we have an extensive military presence in the Middle East that's not going to be altered by a withdrawal from Afghanistan, Iraq, or Syria. So, no, we're not an anti-war nation. We're a nation that's tired of losing wars, but we're more than happy to intervene in a military conflict where we believe we are just, where we are justified, and where we can win. The reality, though, is we're never justified in invading another country. It's not a just war, and we're not going to win. But we're too ignorant as a nation to understand that. We're too.
I'll be honest.
As a nation,
you're the second. You're the second in the last week. I think it is. I think the last person was Danny Sherzan. We had on. I asked him a sort of similar question. He said this. He said the same thing. It's disheartening to hear that, and I hope you're wrong. But I'm going to extend you the credit of believing that you might be right, and that might be why we keep getting into these things. In any event, we've got to go into a break. You're listening to Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. We will be back with Scott on the other side of this break. You're also listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. Don't surrender.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines.
And we're back.
Go for it, Shane.
You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan and Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. Scott, thank you again for being with us. I want to talk Trump. You recently said that you're not going to be voting for Biden. Never would. Let me just make sure I'm getting this exactly right here. I would never vote for Joe Biden. That is the quote from you over on Twitter. Does that mean that you're going to be voting for Trump, or what's your plan, and why is that your proclamation, Scott?
Well, if you know anything about my history, you know that in 1998, September 1998, after I resigned from my position in the United Nations, I testified before a joint session of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee in an effort to, expose or at least explain to the United States Senate why the United States and the Security Council were failing in their stated goals and objectives regarding Iraq. Joe Biden at that time, very influential senator on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, excoriated me, attacked me, belittled me. He claimed that I was throwing a temper tantrum because Scotty Boy couldn't get in to the sites he wanted to get into in Iraq. And he, in turn, was put under harsh criticism by the media, so much so that he apologized and he invited me to his office. We had a lengthy conversation, in which time he claimed to have been enlightened by our meeting and sent me a letter promising that, any time in the future, If I had an issue, we should talk, and he was prepared to do that. Well, in 2000, I was ready to talk with him about, the rush towards war that was already occurring there. He sent his senior staffer who called me a traitor for what I did. It admitted that I was right, but that it was politically inconvenient for Joe Biden to accept the facts that I was putting on the table, because we were in a political year. It was Gore versus Bush, and no way that they were going to back away from Gore and open up a political opportunity for Bush. And then in 2002, he claimed he was going to hold hearings where he was going to talk about the WMD threat. And once again, I approached him, informed him that his facts on WMD are wrong, that we needed to have a discussion so the American people could understand the totality of the picture. He ignored me, held his kangaroo court, condemned Iraq, voted for war, went to war. Joe Biden is the worst possible kind of leader America could hope to put into a position of power. I will never trust the man. I despise the man. He is a liar. I know this based upon firsthand experience. That's why I will never vote for Joe Biden, because it's personal. And it's also that he's just a bad person. He's a liar, a man who doesn't act in the interest of the United States, acts only in his personal political good. What's good for him politically is what he does. That's not what you want from a leader. Having said that, I'm not going to sit here and sing the praises of Donald Trump. I condemn the American political process. I condemn both political parties for putting 330 million Americans in the position of having to choose between, a horrific politician and a horrific leader. I don't believe either of these men deserve to be president, but I'm, as much as I would like to see change in Washington, D.C. after the past 4 years, that change cannot be somebody who's going to be worse. And Joe Biden would be worse, far worse for America than what we get with even Donald Trump.
Now explain that and be specific, because to some degree, I think I agree with you, especially if you're looking at the foreign policy aspect of the two candidates. Joe Biden is a flagrant liar, every bit as much as Trump. I mean, think back to the civil rights stuff, him lying about being part of the civil rights movement. That's a disgusting lie. And using blacks as props, like Jacob Blake or George Floyd, despite the fact that the crime bill and the mean-spiritedness that was put into our criminal justice system came from the last 47 years from the top of Joe Biden. Working with racists to put people in prison and having a kid that's a drug addict. But for some reason, that kid that's a drug addict can get a workers' comp that's not a workers' comp at all, but a job in the Ukraine, making like $80,000. I would imagine there's a lot of crackheads that would like that Joe Biden opportunity that they're not going to get. So a lot of
non-crackheads would like that opportunity too.
Yeah, right. A lot of non-crackheads, right. And so I feel you on the Joe Biden thing, not to mention the Iraq war. You're right. I mean, he championed that Iraq war. He was all for that war with Bush. People need to go back and look at some of the things that Joe Biden was talking about during that time. He was championing that war. And so I totally understand where you're coming from on that. None of them cared about the weapons of mass destruction. Even Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi said she knew Trump was lying. But think about what that means. I knew Biden was lying when he was, I knew Bush was lying when he was talking about those weapons of mass destruction, which means that you basically stood by while a president killed 1 million people and the subsequent presidents after that, like Obama, drone strike king, to the tune of 90% sometime being civilians. Like, this was the policy that we went towards, that the American public accepted, and that the presidents pushed. And this is both. There is no voting solution out of this, right? Because basically both parties have a very similar temperament regarding issues of war and peace. Why do you think the public accepts this? I know you say that you believe that the public is a war public, but keep in mind, the public is not born that way. It's not like a person is born and say, I want to go and punch somebody in the mouth. So why does the public accept this particular positioning of the United States, where the world is basically available from the standpoint of our intervention, and the public seems to accept it.
Last time the public turned against a war in a meaningful fashion was the Vietnam War. Not because they really gave a damn about what was going on in Vietnam. If you track the history of American public support for Vietnam, it waned not because we were killing Vietnamese. We don't care about killing Vietnamese. I'm going to just be frank and honest. So long as the American public is wrapped in a cocoon of comfort that comes from the so-called American dream, where they can buy a car, buy 2 cars, buy 3 cars if they want, live in a house, get a job, and enjoy, food on demand and supermarkets that are supplied by trucks and trains on a great infrastructure. We can get on an airplane, fly to a vacation.
It was the draft, right? Wasn't it the draft? Wasn't that what people effectively were protesting against?
Did it because suddenly we were plucking people out of this zone of comfort and sending them across the sea to die, come back wounded, to see things they didn't want to see, and to experience things they didn't want to see. Yeah. We were inconveniencing the American public. If you take a look at the situation today, we are wrapped in an even greater cocoon of comfort. At least that's the dream.
What is 2% of the country is in the military? So the president has his men, basically? Like it's a separation between the people who go and fight versus the rest of the country to the tune of 98%, right?
Right. And when the boys and girls come home in body bags, believe it or not, there's a segment of society, a significant segment of society says, first of all, we dishonor them when we say, thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. What the hell do you mean, thank you to your service? That doesn't pay the bills of a young mom with 2 children whose husband just died, or a young husband who's taking care of 2 children whose wife just died overseas. Don't thank them for their service. The way you thank them for their service is to honor their service by ensuring we never employ them in wars that do not need to be fought. But to simply say, I thank you for your service. I thank you for defending my rights. You're not defending any rights in Afghanistan, not any American rights. You're not defending any American rights in Iraq. You're simply occupying a sovereign territory and killing the sovereign people of that territory. So, but we cloak American service, and I say this as a longtime Marine who loves the Marine Corps, who loved serving in the Marine, who loves his country, who would die for his country again. I'm not denigrating the service of those who put on the uniform. I'm denigrating those who are ostensibly being served for not understanding what goes into that service, what that service is all about. We have this military, we fund this military, they go abroad and they do things, and we really don't want to know what they do. Jack Nicholson and A Few Good Men was dead right. They are standing on the wall, but we just want them on that wall. We don't really want to know what they're doing. So long as they keep what's behind that wall away from us, so be it. The American public does not understand what it means to be in the military, does not understand what the military is trained to do. Let's just be blunt. The military is trained to kill. If you think otherwise, you don't know what the military does. That doesn't mean that everybody in the military is a killer. We have a handful of killers at the tip of the spear. We're very good at their job, and then we have a lot of people behind that are providing the support, the infrastructure, the facilitation of their mission, of their task. But at the end of the day, the military doesn't exist to make you feel warm and fuzzy. The military exists so they can close with and destroy the enemy through firepower and maneuver. That's what the military does. And the perfect situation would be for the American people to say, if you join the military, I want you to spend 20 years training to kill, but never using you to kill, because we have an effective diplomatic service. We interface with the world peacefully, and we don't need you. That would be the perfect military. People who are trained to do a job they never get to do. That would be ideal. To spend 20 years and never have a Purple Heart, never have a combat award, never even have an overseas deployment award, because you're at home training. And if the country needs you, then you go forth and you do the job, and you do it with deadly efficiency. I'm not a pacifist. If you want to fight my country, I will destroy you. But I would like it to be that you never have to fight my country, because my country knows how to peacefully coexist with the rest of the world. But we don't. The American public today doesn't pay the price for military involvement. The activism you see in the streets today has nothing to do with anti-war sentiment. It has to do with the reality that COVID-19 exposed fundamental faults with the American dream. This cocoon of comfort I talked about, turned out it's mostly fraudulent. We don't have a healthcare system worthy of the name. We don't have a social safety net to protect people when they lose their jobs. We don't have a government that gives a damn. I mean, this is why we have demonstrations in the street, because the American dream, this cocoon of comfort that we wrapped ourselves in, has been shown to be fraudulent, not because suddenly we've become woke about America's involvement in the world. All those demonstrators in the streets, I'll have them waving American flags in a heartbeat if I can come up with a military intervention that I can sell to you is justified, and then we go in and we win and we come home. All these people will be the most patriotic Americans that you've ever seen in their life. So I've lost faith with the American public, because the American public doesn't truly believe in anything other than making themselves comfortable. We would get rid of demonstrators.
It's a damn shame, but the media is complicit in it too. I mean, the government's complicit in it. It's all of a piece. But you know what, Scott? You're telling the truth. We can handle the truth, and I really appreciate you joining us this morning.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. For those listening, that was Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and WMD whistleblower. By the way, you can follow Scott on Twitter at @RealScottRitter. Go over to twitter.com/RealScottRitter. We're going into a break. We're going to be taking calls on the other side of this break. 202-521-1320 is the number to call. Again, that's 202-521-1320. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and we'll be right back.
Fault Lines. Catch all the breaking global, political, and economic news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky.
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. There have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS, not officially, but in practice.
Peter Sunde, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
We increased activities in the Keflavik airbase, and that has to do with more activities from Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usual flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that, in a pipeline dispute, that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in. Fault Lines.
And we're back, and we're taking calls. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And the phone number, if you'd like to use your phone to call ours, our phone number is 202-521-1320. Again, that's 202-521-1320. First up, we've got Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on. What's going on?
Good morning, gentlemen. I'd like to clarify something from yesterday. The person named not Tone Loc is Tone Talks from like the ADOS movement. And by the way, I support some of what they're saying, but not everything. You know, I believe that we all should work together as well. You know, to pass single payer and also the legalization of marijuana for medical use. The story yesterday dealing with Maxine Ghislaine, Ghislaine Maxwell.
Ghislaine Maxwell. But real quick, you're talking about Ghislaine Maxwell, but I also want to just give Tarif props. Sorry, Tarif, for cutting you off, but when you called in yesterday, you were talking about the ADOS movement. We got into it back and forth that other callers echoed. The last couple callers for that segment. It was a long conversation about American descendants of slavery after this conversation we had with Dr. Jared Bell. Anyway, I asked you if you'd be willing to tweet at oh my gosh, I'm forgetting her name right now, but the woman, one of the co-founders, along with Antonio Moore, one of the co-founders. Exactly. And you tweeted at her, and you got a response. So just thank you for doing that, Tarif. Really appreciate your work. Anyway, we're talking about Ghislaine Maxwell.
Oh, yeah. So the unsealed documents where they're going to talk about what she said in 2016 when she gave a deposition, and they also trying to decide to redirect two names in the report because they don't want their lives ruined because their names is in her testimony. But so to me, it's a good thing that this is finally coming out, and everybody else, the victims, the case is moving forward now. Dealing with that, and that's a good thing. So, that's what I'm for. And Trump, if somebody listening to his program, please start putting commercials out there of Pelosi dealing with the stimulus program, how she's holding it up now, and dealing with Joe Biden, dealing with how he disrespected the airman, which he was wrong. They should put commercials up about that. And they got to start looking at the legalization of marijuana for medical use and some other things. That would be helpful. Might as well. If you want to win, you got to get them independents and you got to get the people that's on the left too. That's all I want to say.
You know what? I actually agree. If you were to start pushing for some more of those slightly, not radical, legalizing marijuana is by no means radical, but it's a little bit on the fringe right now. People aren't talking about it. If you were to start pushing for that, that one specifically, I bet a bunch of people would throw themselves behind Trump like they were throwing nugs into a joint. I mean, it would be revolutionary in some sense. It's a silly issue to some extent because we're just talking about war. I wish the anti-war movement were a bit more prominent in our discussions. But still, man, I can't help but agree. I think that he would break open politics to a certain extent with that. We've got another caller, but Jamarl, what's on your mind with that?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, Donald Trump, when he first started running, he should have been thinking about how am I going to get reelected? I mean, honestly, because he was able to win, but he won in such a narrow way. I mean, he basically lost the popular vote, even though he was able to win so much of the vote. I guess my point is, yes, he should have had a laser focus in regards to how am I going to win. And I think what took place was he got confused. I think when COVID-19 hit, he believed that the economy was going to be his way back into the White House, that regardless of me being an ogre, regardless of people not liking me or whatever, they'll vote for me because I'm going to put money in their pockets. And when the economy hit the skids, people still gave him the benefit of the doubt because they understood that it was a virus, not him. At a certain point, his malfeasance, his incompetence, all of that stuff culminated in the public seeing it as his fault. So not only did he get the hit for the virus, he also got the hit for the economy. Trump should have done different things and he should be doing different things now. But I don't think he's going to be making a, turn. It seems that he's basically, it doesn't seem that he's going to make a U-turn. So that's my take on it. But yeah, Tarif, good call, man. Let's go to Stedman in Detroit. Stedman, what's going on, man?
Hey, so I'm calling back to kind of finish my conversation from yesterday. I want to clear up some points. As far as ADOS, it's not inherently anti-immigrant, but what it does is it prioritizes Black Americans. And it addresses certain conversations that, even with the Ice Cube situation, are kind of supposed to be left political no-nos, which is to question immigration. And so, like, when you look at immigration as a whole, irrespective of country, ever since descendants of slaves have been in this country, immigration has really been a disservice to us at every hand. I'm reminded specifically of, like, the draft riots in 1863, where in New York City you saw Irish immigrants who were being conscripted into the Civil War, killing Black freed slaves in the North because they didn't have to go to war, because when you were Blacks, you couldn't serve in the war. You couldn't be drafted into the war. And so, I mean, even if you go further back, when you look at the population disparity between African slaves and whites in early colonial America, they eventually decreased. They got rid of all the barriers for immigration for Europeans, so that they could keep a population difference between the slaves and the whites. Because at one point there were more slaves here than there were white colonists. I also wanted to bring up a book from an author, Nyambi Michelle Carter. She's an associate professor of political science at Howard University. Her book is called American While Black, African Americans, Immigration, and the Limits of Citizenship. It really dives into the understanding of the role immigration plays on African American people. Like I talked about yesterday, you find that descendants of slaves, Americans, are having to compete for jobs with first generation immigrants from third world countries. And so these are low skilled jobs that, Black Americans are still having to do, garbage men, maids, domestic work, agricultural work. And so what you see is that as the country has been able to essentially shuffle Black people further out of the economic opportunity by importing new people, they've never had to address the issues concerning class discrimination or access and discrimination. You think about in the 80s with Reagan, where they imported a lot of nurses from the Caribbean, right? Instead of teaching the Black citizens here how to be nurses, instead of opening doors for them to become nurses, you import nurses who are Black. So on paper, it says we've got XYZ Black nurses, but the Black citizens who live here are still locked out of all this opportunity to move up, to become middle class.
And Stedman, just to interrupt for 1 second, the person or the group that was able to get the most out of affirmative action were white women, to make your point.
True. And that's even, and you can look at that as even a type of double dipping. So now you have white feminists, like Bill Burr's joke, it didn't really land well with a lot of people, but, white women were complicit in all this destruction. They were able to reap the benefits on all ends. Even, George Washington's wife owned more slaves than he did. Okay. And so what we see now is white women would like to claim victimship or minority status. And what that does is allow the white family to double dip, because white women make 80 cents for every dollar for white men, where Black men are making 50 cents or less. Black men make less than white women, Asian women, and if you adjust for the amount of Black men in prison, they make less than Black women. But no one's talking about that. But if white women make and white men make parity, $1 for $1, then that household has $2, where the Black family might have $1.20 or less. So it's a conversation that needs to be had. And, it is disingenuous to just portray every Black person who has an interest in our own survival in the country we built, in the country our ancestors built for free, that we want to have a say at what goes on. We don't have to be imperialists. I still consider myself a leftist. I still consider myself an anti-imperialist. I don't support, a lot of this, all of our, international policy. But for me to have to also claim that I can't address the needs of my people at the same time as addressing the shortcomings or the wrongdoings of the American government, that's like a falsity. That's not true. I can do both, and I do both. So the book again is Nyambi Michelle Carter, associate professor at Howard University. I think it'd be nice to have her on your show as well.
We could, and she's at Howard, DC's on Howard University, so that could be possible. Stedman, thank you for the call. I mean, this is the interesting thing about this stuff. I don't know if that's racism. You're talking about ADOS being this traditional enmity between the economic interests and incentives. The situation basically of Black Americans and immigrants. Is that racism? Is that racism between different minority groupings in the country? I don't know, man. This stuff is complicated. I think we've this might be where identity politics goes wrong, at least in part, is that you muddy the waters so much around your definitions that you can't actually resolve the underlying problems. Like, if you want to help specifically Black men, who I think you're right, are about the most disenfranchised group in American history, how are you supposed to do that? What's the process there? And if the thing is they're going up against, I mean, isn't this like clambering over the lower rungs of the ladder, though, in some sense? Does that make sense, Jamarl?
Yeah, it does make sense. It's not racist. I don't think it's racist for somebody to look at their economic situation and say, if I'm working as a janitor and somebody else is coming into the country and you're hiring them as a janitor, I'm competing with that particular person. I don't think that's racist. That's somebody looking out for their economic benefit. Also, he makes another good point that if you have a nursing shortage in your country and you're drawing nurses from other countries and you have all of these people in poverty, what is your country doing? Meaning your country should be training the people.
The value of the labor.
Exactly. You should be training the people who are there.
It should be training. It should be training your own citizens. Sorry
Yeah, even if it's for free.
Yeah, we absolutely. We've got to go to a break. We've got like 10 seconds left. Thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you to Engineer Andre. Thank you to producers Cam and Raheem. And thank you, Jamarl Thomas. We'll be back tomorrow. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
I want to thank all of you for joining. I appreciate that's another Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan in the books. Fault Lines Stranahan in the books. You guys are going to see this mug a little bit later. But great show today. Like an honest to good, great show. Scalisi, thank you, Scalisi. Trudy, Trump claims and celebrates extrajudicial killings of Antifa activists, Rolling Stones. They didn't want to arrest them. It was just over 15 minutes. Yeah, Trudy, I saw that. That was grotesque. I saw that. I guess your point being Trump is horrible, but I think we already agree with you that Trump is horrible. And yeah, that was a clip, I think it was like last week or something when he was at his campaign rally. He basically said the marshals took 15 minutes. They didn't want to bring him in. That was it. Basically bragging that our police force and that a grouping, because it wasn't just police, it was kind of like several teams of people from several teams. And he's like, they went down there, they didn't want to arrest them, 15 minutes, it was done. Basically bragging that they killed him. They didn't want to do their job, that they are taken into custody, etc. No, they wanted to end his life. That's horrific. So yes, Trudy. Agreed. Trump's horrible. Wesley Walker. Thank you, Wesley. Thank you, Wesley. And McCoy Williams. I say that it's false cost of the story that was concocted in a place that could be true. Oh, right. That was the complaint about the story for the Biden-Trump stuff. That basically the origins of it is so bizarre that it just seems concocted, which I agree. It does seem concocted. But the documents themselves, meaning if I got my hands on documents and I needed to get those out to the public, how do I do it? I don't want to give it out directly. So how do I do it? And so they come up with this cockamamie story about a repairman. Okay, fair enough. But the documents themselves, are they real or false? That's the only thing that matters. And I don't want to hear shit from Democrats considering the Trump and Russia nonsense that they pull for 3 years. But Biden seems to be quiet about this, where the media seems to be making a big deal about it. So we need to hear some heavier denials from Joe Biden on this issue. All right, I'm going to end this here. I'm going to say like, share, and subscribe. The Jeffrey Toobin story, by the way, part of me feels it should be dealt with compassion, and part of me thinks, God, this is just funny. And I suspect that both of them are true. It is funny. By the same token, I feel bad for the guy. It goes both ways. But I don't know why you're masturbating during a business meeting. That seems over the top. Seems over the top. But to each their own. To each their own. He's not breaking a crime. He's just mastering his domain, as you can call it, if you want. Like, share, and subscribe. See you guys